does multiple ministries, but she was really one of the key people who helped the Eucharistic Congress come off. So for those of you that were able to go to that, thank you, Mary. It's a job well done.
Right there, and it's going back.
I shared it on our Facebook.
It's Mr. Technology over here. So we now have one person in our IT department at the diocese. Of course, we have PNJ, as you all know, who's kind of doing stuff, but we have one person, and we're lucky we have Dave because he can do a lot of stuff for us. They do that. And Dave is getting ready, as you all know, to go and take 100 and some youth and adults to the National Catholic Youth Conference, and Chris will be there. And so we wish him blessings on that. And believe me, that's been a lot of work. You know, whether it's 100 or 300, it's a lot of work. So we're grateful today for doing that. Finally, one more thing about Chris is that you'll see underneath here, Marathon Ministry, right? And I think about 6 or 7 years ago, founded the company, founded the company, which again resources those in ministry to get back with a particular focus on youth. But as I say, this covers the whole gamut, so it kind of understands parish and information. Finally, I want to thank Christy and Rosemary Gavin for hosting us, along with Father Burke, and for providing us all that we need to make today a good time for all of us.
Fresh flowers.
Yes, okay.
That was on my writing sheet. So.
Must have fresh flowers.
Too, right?
Yeah. It's all good. So again, welcome, blessings for the day, and we'll get to chat during the day worship. So, Chris?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. I want to start in prayer in a moment, but just again, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. When I met David Stagliano a couple of years ago, well, we've crossed paths.
Before that, yeah.
Yeah, we've crossed paths many times, but we were hanging out together at Continuing the Journey conference down in Newark Diocese in 2022, and Albany actually has a pretty special place in my heart. One of my sisters, I have 4 sisters. My sister Catherine, who's 3 years younger, she lives here in Albany. Got married at St. Ambrose Parish down the road, and everything. And so, your parents? Oh, that way? All right, yeah. That way, down the road that way. So, just being up here, my mom lives in Lenox, Massachusetts right now, and then one of my favorite places on this earth are the Adirondacks, which I know is not part of the diocese technically, but
Some of it is.
Some of it is. All the high peaks, so
No, they're all.
that's all I really care about. But so tomorrow I'll be adventuring there with my buddy Bob, and so who knows? This might be the last speaking gig. No, I'm just kidding. Just pray for me as I go out there. But speaking of mountains, a place that I hold dear, a place where I really connect with God is in the mountains. And I don't know if it's just because of an adventure spirit that I was born with, but also one of my favorite passages is from First Book of Kings, chapter 19, when Elijah goes out to the mountain. So I thought we would start today just with a little reflection on that Bible verse. I hope you don't mind. My Bible is on my phone, so I'm not just scrolling TikTok while I'm talking here while I'm reading prayer. But I just want us to remember and focus on is, during this time, where is God calling you? What is God saying to you? Because just again, before we jump into prayer, for those of you who might not be familiar with this, I've always loved the story of Elijah because talk about a guy who's facing adversity, right? Like no matter what's going on, there's chaos around him. Other prophets are being killed, like he's being chased, he's hiding, he's coming out. Proclaiming God's word, he's doing these crazy things, in the name of God, and yet he's still like fighting that uphill battle. And so I'm sure for many of us, especially with the reality that you all have faced in the last year with bankruptcy. I know Baltimore, we're going through that right now as well. And just, all the tragedies that happen in the church and everything. There's a lot of times where we're just like, God, where are you? So I think it's important for us to spend some time just reflecting on God's presence. So you could just take a deep breath and just remember we're always in the presence of the Lord. The Father, Son, Holy Spirit. This is a reading from 1 Kings chapter 19. When the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, and the Lord will pass by." There was a strong and violent wind rending the mountains and crushing rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a silent sound. When he heard this, Elijah hid his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. The voice said to him, "Why are you here?" I want you to just imagine you're in Elijah's place right now. You're on that edge, but you're in that cave, hiding, hoping that things will just change, that things will pass by, that the Lord will reveal himself. And there's a strong and violent wind. Maybe that's just all the chaos that's happening at home. There's an earthquake, and maybe that's the chaos that's happening at the parish and work. And of course there's a fire, and maybe that fire represents just the amount of stress and tiredness and anxiety that you're feeling in your life. What we're reminded of in this reading is that despite all the chaos, all the craziness, all the madness that's happening in our personal life, professional life, and inside of us, if we can quiet ourselves, hear that light, silent sound, telling us that he loves us, that he has us right where we need to be, that we are where we are meant to be. I'm going to read for you the verse one more time. Then the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. The Lord will pass by." There was a strong and violent wind rending the mountains and crushing rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire. The Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, light, silent sound. When he heard this, Elijah hid his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. The voice said to him, "Why are you here?" That's the question I want you to think about today. Why has God called you here? Has God called you here because you're just tired? You're stretched out in a million different places. You have a million different hats that you wear. Are you here because you're hoping that something that's said, whether it's from my presentation or at your table or over a cup of coffee, invigorates you, ignites you, reminds you of the calling of God's place in your life? Or are you here because we're just looking, for community? Because sometimes, just like Elijah being alone in a cave, it can feel like a lot. But one of the things we overlook in this reading at times, I think, is in verse 11, where it says there was this strong and violent wind rending the mountains and crushing rocks. It says before the Lord. That Elijah, even though he's facing all this chaos, he's never in a situation. It's intense silence, say that is God's voice. So are you here today for that community, for recognizing that you're not alone? So again, as we get in our activities, in our session, think about that, pray on that question. why are you here? Lord God, I ask that as we continue to meet today, that you just continue, that you mold our hearts, that you show us the steps that we need to take, where it is we need to go. And Lord, that you remind us that what we do is not just a job, what we do is not just work, but what we're doing is fulfilling the call that is placed on us in baptism. Now, Lord, even though there are goals to accomplish and tasks that need to be done, just like you told Martha, Lord, that we just need to spend time being with you. So when we're present with you, we fill our cup. Our cup is full, we fill the cups of others, Lord, because your love, wisdom, mercy, your grace is bountiful. There is no end. So God, as we ask that question, why are we here? Ask that you not only bless that question and those prayers, but all the other ones that we hold in our hearts. Lord, we love you. In your name, we pray. All right, so today we're gonna cover a whole bunch of different things, and my hope is, some of the stuff that we're gonna do here today, and I'll make sure I share it with the diocese, any activities or things that you might want to take and use in your parishes, with your teams, and everything like that. Feel free. I'll make sure that we connect and share some of those resources if they're not already in the PDF, because I really do like this stuff that I'm doing. I just want to share it. Like David had mentioned, I've been in the trenches of ministry for about 20 years. I got my I started in middle school youth ministry. Before people are like, oh, poor Chris, I love middle school youth ministry. I think the rest of it is insane. The high school students have their minds made up. Little kids, don't ask me to get down on my knees and play with them. But middle school students, they are crazy enough, they are insecure enough where I feel like I fit in, right? So, but also over the years, like many of you start in one ministry and you end up taking on like a dozen others, right? So, just by a show of hands, how many of you wear multiple hats, meaning you work outside of just like youth ministry or children's ministry or things like that? All right. If you're singular focused, I'm not shaming you. I'm just congratulating you on what or it's probably because you just started today. No, in all reality, I know we have a variety of different ministries represented, and even though we're going to be focusing on, even though a lot of my examples are focused on reaching the next generation, I really do believe that it all is connected. A lot of times, I think the big problem is when we look at family ministry or youth ministry or children's ministry or music ministry, we look at it through a programmatic lens and we don't really see how everything is completely tied together. And really, I think youth ministry is a good place to start because if we're honest, even before the pandemic, we were seeing parishes struggle to reach the young church. We were seeing parishes struggle to reach young people. And if we're really going to be honest with ourselves, the last 3 years didn't create the problems we're seeing, but only escalated them. And we've seen resources dwindle. And we find it's impossible to find volunteers. How many of you feel like it's really hard to find volunteers? Yeah. And you know what? It's not just a church thing. I work in a non-for-profit. I'm on the board of a non-for-profit that works in prison ministry. And that's always been hard to find volunteers, but it's really hard to find volunteers. My wife is in HR at a medical institution in Baltimore, and they have trouble finding volunteers as well as staff. It's almost just like people have gone disappearing or just maybe on social media. I don't know, but volunteers, people, good men and women, it's dwindling. And when we feel that burden of not enough resources, not enough help, and the workload and the urgency, because our world is, our country, our neighborhoods are becoming more and more secularized, it kills our joy. And after a while, it grinds at us, and it overwhelms us, and it burns us out. And just like Elijah into the cave, we just want to hide, but the Lord is telling us, no, come out to the edge. Come out to the edge, I'm there. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to see any more of us lost to burnout. One of the things that David, I think we've talked about this before, is we go to these conferences like NCYC or Exchange, and it kind of gets sad because in the last couple of years, men and women have been around for decades, probably like gone. And it's not because they left the parish ministry to their diocesan ministry, diocesan ministry to their parish ministry, they left ministry, and in some cases, the church. And it's really a somber time, and I don't want to see more people, lose their jobs or burn out. And if we're going to change this trend, we have to make some big changes. And if we're going to reach the young church, if we're going to reach the faithful, if we're going to reach the lost, then we have to learn how to stop working harder and start working smarter. Stop working harder and start working smarter. I think one of the things that we do that is completely insane is when things get tough, we just decide, you know what, I'm going to work 2 more hours or 5 more hours. I'm going to just stay at this thing a little bit longer. I'm going to just, you know what, instead of training this volunteer, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and work harder and harder. But all that does is burn us out. And it's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I mean, working harder is not working smarter. You have to learn how to work smarter, not harder. And that means slowing down. That means slowing down to talk with the people around us and focus on something comprehensive instead of reacting. Because right now it's really easy to react to stuff. The pandemic happens, we shut down, we reacted, right? We all jumped on Zoom, we had no idea about Zoom. The next thing you know, Zoom bombing's happening, and like dioceses are trying to throw out policy and everything like that. And it's just like, what do we do, right? And it's just like, we have to stop reacting. We have to slow things down. And I recognize that, like, as I'm saying this, I'm saying it into a mirror because it's the same thing for myself. We have to stop moving so quickly. To create a comprehensive ministry means taking a step back, listening to God, and collaborating with the right people. Not only do we need to build healthy ministries, but rediscover the joy of our calling as a disciple. So what does this mean to have a healthy, comprehensive ministry where we can reach young people, old people, people of different ages and experience that joy? Well, right now some of you are thinking, I can't slow down, right? Chris, you're insane. How can I slow down, especially after 3 years of struggling? I mean, slowing down might feel impossible. After all, in the last year, your workload, my workload, I know, has increased while the resources and help have decreased. I mean, just a little bit about my story. Before the pandemic, I was director of youth and young adult ministry and confirmation at the parish I'm currently at. During the pandemic, one of my coworkers retired, the other one left to go teaching, and that meant I took on children's ministry, adult ministry, baptism, marriage prep, and CY was sports and scouts and IT thrown in there, but that's always a youth ministry thing, right? They're like, oh, he's young. I'm like, not the youngest on staff anymore, guys. Like, that person there, my 13-year-old reminds me of that often. But I mean, like, so a lot has just been taken on. And of course, me, I don't want to see my church fail. I don't want to see my church fold. And so all of a sudden, I think I can save it. I put on the savior complex, and I'm like, I'll do that. YouTube can show me how to do this. I'll make up for ChatGPT. Now they can write all my talks. It's like that's a whole other issue. But my point is that we react, right? And we've got to slow things down. And slow things down because otherwise we're going to burn ourselves out. So again, maybe it's hard because you had to take on additional work in ministries that have nothing to do with what you were originally hired to do. Maybe your staff has been reduced like mine was, and some of the responsibilities of a coworker have now just fallen on your plate. Maybe you're in a situation where the financial status of your parish is in question, and you're worried that you might not even have a job. And when we worry about things like that, it affects our productivity because we're constantly worried, we're constantly looking over our shoulder, wondering when the shoe's going to drop. Slowing down might seem like completely the wrong thing to do, but we have to avoid the temptation to just working harder, putting our heads down, and going at this. So what I want us to do today is look at some of the elements that will help us slow down. But before we do that, I'm again, background's in youth ministry, but I'm a tangible guy, and because of those two things, I like games and competition. Do you guys like competition? If you don't, I'm sorry. So what we're gonna do is this activity called the Marshmallow Tower. All right, Marshmallow Spaghetti Tower. Has anyone ever heard of it before? All right. Well, you might like this thing. You know, you might not. You might hate it. Like, if I ever have to do that again, I'm quitting. Don't quit. All right. So basically, at your tables, you're gonna compete as different teams. You're gonna have 18 minutes to build the tallest spaghetti tower using 20 pieces of uncooked spaghetti, a piece of tape, piece of string, and one marshmallow. Now, here's my disclaimer. Don't eat these marshmallows. I won't tell you how old they are.
From a camping trip, probably.
I wouldn't have said that disclaimer. You know, they were used as part of youth ministry. Actually,
Oh, okay.
So,
Not chubby bunny.
yeah, no, not chubby bunny. No, these are not pre-used ones, but they were maybe in my car a little bit. But anyhow, so what you're gonna do is, as a team, you're gonna have 18 minutes to build the tallest tower. And actually, all right, so 20 pieces of spaghetti, marshmallow, 1 yard tape, 1 yard string. So basically, 18 minutes to build the tallest tower with marshmallow on top. So you can't pull apart the marshmallow. You can't use that as glue or anything. The marshmallow sits on top. We're going to measure from the top of the marshmallow to your table. You can't tape the structure to the table, right? So it has to be freestanding. You can use the tape to spaghetti and to string and stuff like that, but you can't secure it to the table. Again, you can't cut or split the marshmallow, and the structure must stand on its own. Okay, you can't suspend it from the ceiling. You can't have someone like holding it like this. You know, it has to be able to stand on its own. All right, does that make sense? Any questions? All right, so what I would like for you to do is have one representative to come up. We have tape here, piece of string here, scissors. You can use scissors to cut the tape or string or even spaghetti. You can break the spaghetti apart and then collect your marshmallow as well. So I'll give you guys a minute to strategize, come up. Don't start until I say so, all right? I mean, you can come up, but don't start building the structure until I say so. And you can only use the materials you were given. You do not have to use all the materials.
You can't tape it to the table, but if you can like, well, you know, either like make a foot or like give a tractor on the ground, just make a square and like then it's like, or yeah, like a little.
Yeah, just figuring them out.
Well, you need the bottom of the piece of spaghetti. Yeah. Taping it around the bottom. So it's got a bigger piece. Yeah, so that it's like, so that it's got like a. Yeah, and then it's got like a. So you need to give it more surface area.
Just take it a little bit on the side.
Yep. Something where it gives it more of a, yes. Yes.
Okay. Good example for you. Just do a little bit of tape on the top and then bend it over so that it's gonna be like this. Yeah. Yeah, so that's. You know, as a last one, that's one language.
Anytime, anything with you. I was gonna say,
Yeah.
but that's,
So this is an activity that I didn't invent, as some of you have done it before, or different variations of it. It's actually a part of some larger studies out there, which we'll break down. But I wanted to share with you a little video that explains this a little further. So.
Called the Marshmallow Challenge. And the idea is pretty simple. Teams of 4 have to build the tallest freestanding structure out of 20 sticks of spaghetti, 1 yard of tape, 1 yard of string, and a marshmallow. The marshmallow has to be on top. And though it seems really simple, it's actually pretty hard because it forces people to collaborate very quickly. And so I thought this was an interesting idea, and I incorporated it into a design workshop, and it was a huge success. And since then, I've conducted about 70 design workshops across the world with students and designers and architects, even the CTOs of the Fortune 50. And there's something about this exercise that reveals very deep lessons about the nature of collaboration, and I'd like to share some of them with you. So normally, most people begin by orienting themselves to the task. They talk about it, they figure out what it's going to look like, they jockey for power, then they spend some time laying out spaghetti. They spend the majority of their time assembling the sticks into ever-growing structures. Just as they're running out of time, someone takes out the marshmallow, and then they gingerly put it on top, and they stand back, and ta-da! They admire their work. But what really happens most of the time is that the ta-da turns into an uh-oh. The entire structure to buckle and to collapse. So there are a number of people who have a lot more uh-oh moments than others. And among the worst are recent graduates of business school. They lie, they cheat, they get distracted, and they produce really lame structures. And of course, there's teams that have a lot more ta-da structures. And among the best are recent graduates of kindergarten. It's pretty amazing, as Peter tells us. Not only do they produce the tallest structures, but the most interesting structures of them all. So the question you want to ask is, how come? Why? What is it about them? And Peter likes to say that none of the kids spend any time trying to be CEO of Spaghetti Inc., right? They don't spend time jockeying for power. But there's another reason as well. And the reason is that business students are trained to find the single right plan, right? And then they execute on it. And then what happens is when they put the marshmallow on top, they run out of time, and what happens? It's a crisis. Sound familiar, right? Okay, what kindergartners do differently is that they start with the marshmallow and they build prototypes, successive prototypes, always keeping the marshmallow on top. So they have multiple times to fix individual prototypes along the way. So designers recognize this type of collaboration as the essence of the iterative process. And with each version, kids get instant feedback about what works and what doesn't work. So the capacity to play and prototype is really essential. But let's look at how different teams perform. So the average for most people is around 20 inches. Business school students, about half of that. Lawyers, a little better, but not much better than that. Kindergartens, better than most of us. Architects and engineers. 39 inches is the tallest structure I've seen. And why is it? Because they understand triangles and self-reinforcing geometrical patterns are the key to building self-reinforcement stable structures. So CEOs, a little bit better than average, but here's where it gets interesting. If you put an executive admin on the team, they get significantly better. Incredible. You know, you look around, you go, oh, that team's gonna win. You can just tell beforehand. And why is that? Because they have special skills of facilitation. They manage the process. They understand the process. And any team who manages and pays a close attention to work will significantly improve the team's performance. Specialized skills and facilitation skills, the combination leads to strong success. 10 teams that typically perform, you'll get maybe 6 or so that have standing structures. And I tried something interesting. I thought, let's up the ante once. So I offered a $10,000 prize of software to the winning team. So what do you think happened to these design students? What was the result? Here's what happened. Not one team had a standing structure. Not one had, if anyone had built, say, a 1-inch structure, they would have taken home the prize. So isn't it interesting that high stakes have a strong impact? We did the exercise again with the same students. What do you think happened then? So now they understand the value of prototyping. So the same team went from being the very worst to being among the very best. They produced the tallest structures in the least amount of time. So there's deep lessons for us about the nature of incentives and success. So you might ask, why would anyone actually spend time writing a marshmallow challenge? And the reason is I help create visual tools and processes to help teams build cars and video games and visual effects. And what the marshmallow challenge does is it helps them identify the hidden assumptions. Because frankly, every project has its own marshmallow. The challenge provides a shared experience, a common language, common sense to build the right prototype. And so this is the value of the experience of this so simple exercise. And those of you who are interested may want to go to marshmallowchallenge.com. It's a blog that you can look at how to build the marshmallows. There's step-by-step instructions on this. There are crazy examples from around the world of how people tweak and adjust the system. There's world records there on this as well. And the fundamental lessons, I believe, is that design truly is a contact sport. It demands that we bring all of our senses to the task and that we apply the very best of our thinking, our feeling, and our doing to the challenge that we have at hand. And sometimes a little prototype of this experience is all that it takes to turn us from an uh-oh moment to a ta-da moment, and that can make a big difference. Thank you very much.
Initial thoughts, reactions after watching the video.
Yeah.
You're tape it to the table, and they tape it to the table.
Yeah, no, that's why I don't show the video ahead of time. Cheating.
It was a book, a number of years ago, so everything.
Yeah, right. Sometimes we overtalk. Yeah, everything. Just like that was right.
Their exercise, they back to discuss what was done.
Yeah. Well, we are going to discuss it. Don't worry, I'm not going to have you rebuild spaghetti towers, although Jane has free time. All these things are at a local store, so yeah, I mean, sorry, you're gonna.
Well, I was just going to say, when I think about how we do this process, the team is repeatedly trying to rebuild the design, wasn't really focused on the marshmallow, we were focused on the structure, the base.
Yeah,
Because we knew if we didn't have a good base, it was all gonna fall apart, so we kept redesigning that.
yeah, and that's a great thought, and we're gonna come back to that, so, yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there any follow-up about the difference between a group of people who know each other versus?
Yeah,
When I know everybody at this table and I know their skill set and I know their this. So it was very easy for me to like not push David when he said he was just gonna pray.
yeah. But the question is, they did Frank Hart. No,
I
but-
failed.
But to answer your question in all seriousness, yeah, it does make a difference. I mean, it does and it doesn't. So like, the advantage of doing it with people you know is exactly like what you said. You know everyone's skill sets. You're like, okay, so and so is gonna take charge, and I trust that they're gonna take charge. It can also have a negative side effect where you're like, oh, I'm at a table with Alpha, whoever, and they're just gonna like not include any of us, right? Where with strangers, you could get the luck of the draw of people who just like connect and click. But then at the same time, you're spending a lot of time like as you say, jockeying for power, right? Like, do I step up? Oh, I don't want to really be that person that takes control, like, but I think I know how to do this. And it really is an interesting dynamic. I will say I've done this with my students, I've done this with volunteers, I've done this at workshops like this. And true to the video, unless there's someone who's a former architect or engineer, the students always do a lot better than the adults. And especially the younger you go, and it is one of those things where, like you said, you know, everything you learn, or that book, everything you learn in kindergarten, right? Like, sometimes we focus of some basics. Just yeah, out of like breaking that down, like what were some of the strategies your team had going into it? Like, just kind of like, oh, she's got it, I'm stepping back, or was it like, you know, what were some of the strategies? Yes.
Actually, what I got here is we started throwing out some ideas, but we each listened to each other. We changed the way we were facilitating it by what each person added to it. So we were lucky that everybody put in their books.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So gaining input from the crowd or from the group, yeah, having people share, yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. And I was looking, you guys are one of the more encouraging groups of people that I ever heard. I've heard some demoralizing. You know, again, not just the teens. Teens can get kind of nasty, but with like adults, and I'm just like, oh, this is a Christian.
One thing I noticed is that we didn't ask permission to touch it. Like, we trusted each other to put, you know, to give a little support here. Nobody said, and sometimes it was here, but when we saw it wobble, each of us whose hands were on it were very comfortable jumping in and supporting.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. I wouldn't have expected that.
Yeah.
Because I would have expected one here.
Right.
But we didn't. I don't know. They're all here.
Well, right, and that's another great point is when you have a group of leaders, people who are always in a leadership position, sometimes it can be a challenge. And then sometimes it's easy to really understand that leadership role. And so that's like one of the things I want you to think about, right? So, well, actually, before I get to that, how about the resources? Do you guys feel like you had enough? Did you need more? Like, thoughts on the amount? Okay, that's fair. Yeah, yeah. How many of you guys felt like you could use everything that you were given? Jesus. All right.
Or tape would have been good. I just would have taped the whole thing.
You think more tape would have fixed that? Okay. No, I'm just kidding. So, I mean, how does this connect with what we do in ministry? There's a lot of different parallels. So the one big thing is, what I want to encourage you is, I use this activity every couple of years. One week we do it with our student leaders quite a bit because we want to teach them collaboration, troubleshooting, all those different things. We also use it with our volunteers. Again, very fun, inexpensive activity that you can do. Your TED Talk is online. I'll make sure you guys get that link and everything. I'll show that TED Talk because, it saves me some time from explaining it all and everything. And plus, it's kind of entertaining to watch. And the reason we do it is not just because of collaboration and team building and troubleshooting, but going back to, sorry, your name? Richard. I'll try to get to what Richard shared with the Marshmallow, right? A lot of teams I saw were focused on building base, the Marshmallow kind of sat there. And there's, yeah,
Oh, it's not.
right.
That was like a minute left. Oh, great.
Yeah, well, and we forget about the marshmallow until the end. And how often are we in our ministries where we forget what the end, why we're here to grow the disciples. We know we're here to evangelize, proclaim the gospel and share the love of God. But that's sometimes where we leave it, is just with that catechetical definition. We don't really explore and look and say, okay, what is it? Except you pick up the marshmallow, oh, it's like David, sometimes I trick people and put a jumbo marshmallow in there. Yeah, miniature marshmallow, right? But that, to my point, is small marshmallow, small vision is a lot easier to accomplish than big vision, right? But part of the problems that we face in our ministry is we never think about the big mind because we're so stuck in business. It's like, I just gotta get through this weekend, right? I just gotta get through this talk. I gotta just get through the VBS. I just gotta get through Easter. I just gotta get through RCIA prep. And then I will figure it out this summer, right? And then I will figure it out over Christmas. And then this weekend, I am going to go 24 hours and I will emerge the 10 commandments of my ministry, right? But the problem is that magical summer that we dream about that we thought we had as kids never comes back. The next thing we know, we're like, what do you mean we have catechesis next week? Quickly. Just find YouTube, and part of the problem is we don't slow down. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah. Oh, you're getting way too late. But I mean, like in all seriousness, the marshmallow represents the why behind the ministry. The marshmallow represents the why behind the ministry. So if you're doing this with volunteers, do your volunteers know why they do what they do, right? If it's about helping, if you're working in youth ministry, it's about helping teenagers come to know Christ, right? Come to know Christ. Are they able to rally together, troubleshoot, figure out what life, that teenager's life is so messy? Christ. If you are responsible for RCIA, right? It's like the marshmallow is making sure that when they accept Christ into their life, when they receive those sacraments, that they are doing it with full consciousness and love and everything like that. But how often are we ready, remembering that, but troubleshooting around messiness in their life? The spaghetti, the tape, the string, that all represents the resources that are given to you. And sometimes those resources work really well, right? Like the tape is great. Computer technology is great until it doesn't work, right? Technology is wonderful until it doesn't work, right? Volunteers are great until they don't show up, right? Fire alarms are great until they go off, right? So that's yeah.
For us, for one of our comments, that we had a great base. It's actually pretty stable. It's got a lot. It's pretty tight. But once again, when the top is too heavy and it starts to wobble, it's falling to those poor, sane people that are holding it up.
I mean, and to that point, right? Sometimes we're like, I remember, doing youth ministry as long as I have, and working to the parishes that I've had. It sometimes surprises people that I've never had my own ministry space. I've had to share everything. I feel like it's growing up all over here. I have to share everything with my siblings. It's not fair, even though I'm one of the older ones. But No, I mean, like, sharing, like, I've never had my own space, and I always thought that was a crutch to not do ministry well. If I only had my own space, if I only had, you know, like, middle school ministry or high school ministry, then I could do everything. It was like not having enough, right? And, but then you meet parishes and churches that have different space, and they're still facing obstacles and dysfunctions. So it's one of those things of, it's not necessarily what you have.
I was just going to say, while we were doing it, I was kidding everyone. I said I was writing lessons based on what we were doing, because everything we were building was all about, for us, was all about getting all these legs for our foundation. And I was thinking of it in regard to whether you're in Catholic schools or in the diocese, whatever your ministry is, you could have many, many legs, many volunteers, many people working. But if we don't have a strong foundation in what each of us are doing, there's our tower is born. So our foundation was really strong at the beginning, but then it wasn't strong enough to hold. But I kept saying, I'm writing a lesson because I thought that is us in our parishes. We could be hoping and praying for many, many more volunteers, which would be awesome, right? But maybe strengthening what we have too is very important. Like you said, simplifying.
Yeah.
Stop looking at something so deep,
yeah,
and start simplifying and getting back to basics.
Well, and I think you're right, but let me challenge that a little bit more, because I think, again, part of the problem is we spend a lot of time focusing on the foundation and not enough on the marginal. And so, like, you could build a solid foundation. You could say, like, all right, we got this curriculum, we got this structures, we got this space, we got volunteers. But if they don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, if they aren't disciples themselves, if they don't understand why, what we do as a church, right? And I mean, the university church, then that foundation will not carry the greatest education, right? And so there's a lot of times we spend too much of our energy on, you know, knowledge-based catechesis, or too much of our time on experiential-based ministry. And we forget that at the end of the day, it's about personal relationship, personal encounter with Jesus Christ. Like, this is where Pope Francis talks about being coming, right? That's not just for young people, it's for all ages, and so that why, what we're trying to, why we exist as a church, right? I think, like, we could all rattle off what the Catechism tells us, what the law tells us, but, you know, all the church fathers and saints and everything tell us, but really, at the end of the day, like, why does your local parish exist? Why does your ministry within that? What is it open to?
For us, it's kind of like one of the perfect examples. When we first knew that Rachel had already done it, so we put our trust in Rachel, like, okay, you know, because of the time, okay, Rachel. And then when that base, you know, when that square base didn't work, you know what I mean? Like how you know, how it was done before. And then we started, okay, well, let's think about, you know, doing the tripod, and then we all kind of jumped in, and then it was that great success of, did it, you know, like everyone, you know, participated in it. You know what it for, like, the unknowns to how it fell over. It was like,
David's prayers.
oh, this awesome. You know what I mean? And then it fell. You know what I mean? Like sometimes, no matter how wonderful and how much, you know, energy and how like, oh no, high five, then all of a sudden it's like, you know, that letdown, that, you know, why didn't more folks show up? Or, you know, why, you know what I mean? Like,
Great idea,
you know, what do you mean on this evaluation? You know, it was great, you know what I mean? So it was kind of like that, you know what I mean? It was like a, you know, a perfect mirror of do what we know. Okay, that's not working. Let's quickly change it. And then thinking, all right, this is great. And then for some reason, unbeknown to whatever, and planning purposes, it's like, oh, I can't believe it.
Well,
We gotta start from square one.
and there's multiple ways of looking at it, right? Like, you all could look at that and feel completely defeated. But that, it reminds me of first year in ministry. Again, I got my start in middle school youth ministry. And our middle school programs at the church I was at were on Sunday nights. And it happened that Halloween fell on Sunday. And so there was this big debate. Do we have youth ministry because kids were trick-or-treating and everything like that? And so our high school youth minister, like, she decided that we weren't going to have high school ministry, which is like, you know what, why don't we coordinate a middle school Halloween party, right? And so, you know, we're like, all right, we'll get a bonfire, we'll have, you know, more candy than you could ever think of, we'll play games and everything like that. And I remember, you know, advertising it, we called the fire marshal, be like, we do a bonfire? It's like, absolutely not. We do a trash can fire, which fire is fire, we'll still do it and everything. You know, convinced our volunteers to be there, and Sunday night rolls around, and we're ready for kids to show, and one kid shows up. One kid shows up, and there I am, standing in front of the trash can fire.
Look like one you're in the homeless thing.
Yeah, with this one kid next to me, and he turns to me and he says, "This is the best night ever." And I said, "Kid, you have a sad life." You know, of course, things to play, like, just the earn, and it reminded me that no matter how much we try and fail, like, God is always at work, right? If we fail, God does not. If we fail, God does not. We might choose not to do His will, we might choose to refuse to trust Him, but He will always prevail. He will always exist. That's one thing. The second thing that kind of struck me from the video, and I'm just curious because I didn't see how everyone was working, but the whole, especially with the kindergartens, prototyping, failing, building. It seemed like most of you were just trying to build that perfect structure and just saying like, all right, we're gonna go for this once, right? And like, it was impressive that some of you stepped away with a minute or two left. I don't think a minute or two is the time to tinker. But did any of you do like prototypes and say, let's try this, and it failed and say, okay, well, here's how we improve it? You did that. All right, great.
Fear of wasting resources.
What's that?
Fear of wasting resources.
Yeah.
If you broke it, forget it.
We say that it's a structure, and when second, we look at how can we make it, and that's when we can focus on getting straight into different parts of it and make it work.
Right.
So it's almost like, this is what we have, and we gotta make this work.
Right. So my question is, in your ministries, not how many times do you blow up and start over, but how many times do you start with something small and build from it, right? Like, and prototype it and build from it. Say like, okay, let's start with this. Let's see if that works. Okay, that works. Or now let's tweak it. Right now let's expand it. You know, a lot of times we'll go in and just say, this whole thing just stinks. Like, let's just start from scratch. And then you're like, oh, I just spent X amount of dollars on curriculum, or oh, I just wasted all that time, you know, planning the retreat, or oh, I just, you know, wasted all that time working on a PowerPoint that never went through for class, right? And there's so many times where we go all in for nothing because we're trying to work harder and not smarter. So yeah, we could pull a lot. This is not the workshop on spaghetti and marshmallows, but it's definitely something that I want to encourage you guys to think about. And again, we do this with teams. We do this with our volunteers. You know, I do this with workshops. You can do it with families and teams. It's just fun just because it is a chance for them to do something together, think about how they collaborate and work together. But most importantly, and we'll talk about this, we're going to take a short little break, but of never losing focus on the marshmallow. All right, so why don't we take about, before I talked about, we talked about the marshmallow, right? And an exercise that, again, I do with clients and again, with my volunteers, everything that I'm sharing with you is stuff that I share with our volunteers and children, youth ministry, adult ministry. Again, some of this is catered more towards teens, but I do think it's transferable and applicable all over the place. But is again, who's that teen, or I guess I should rephrase that, who's that marshmallow, right? Who's the marshmallow in your community? So we earlier handed out these sheets, and at the top it says, who's that young person, or who's that person, who are you trying to reach? And if you're in ministry long enough, you do see the fruits of your labor, and you do see the impact that you do have. I know, again, being in ministry for 20 years, it's amazing when I run into a former team who now are adults, and some of them have kids in my ministry. I don't think I'm that old, but I'm not. But it's amazing to see those fruits, especially when you're like, hey, that kid's bringing his kid to church, and he was the same one that locked himself in the bathroom on the retreat, or spray painted the wall, or things like that. It's just like, oh, God is good all the time, right? But what I want you to do is, this is gonna be kind of a reflective activity. Let's take just, 3 or 5 minutes to think about some of the fruit that you have seen in your ministry, and especially when it comes to an individual, a young person, or an adult, if you're working more with adults. Just in your years of ministry, whether it's 5 days or 30 years. I want you to take some time thinking about, okay, what are some of the ways that I've seen God change lives through the ministry that I oversee, right? Yes, we're giving God the credit, but He did use you, and so you are blessed in that. But again, just take some time. You can write them on the sheet, or if you have an extra paper, you don't need to get a lot of space, but just spend a few minutes writing down how that young person or that person grew in faith through your ministry. All right, egg table is, something you love to share and something you might not, but egg table is love for you to just take a couple minutes just to share about that young person or that person that's been impacted by your ministry. And it can be what you wrote down or a little bit more, so let's just take about 5 or 7 minutes.
So when I have my chair, I have my GM, he's a freshman at yeah, he's my first class that I taught, and he said to me after confirmation, for like the first law of confirmation, I didn't do enough basic knowledge. And so then he ended up falling. He's 11th grade year and 12th grade year. And one of the last things he said to me before he went to school is, he said, "You were so excited for information." So I asked myself why I wasn't as excited. And so that's what propelled him to be like everybody's favorite. Like all my 8th grade and 9th grade kids like my contestants. So I mean, he's great. He's playing baseball very fun, very sweet. And so everybody looked up to him, and you know, so he's my success story in my way.
So that way, it's a community thing.
Oh, yeah, well, he already talked to me, he wants to run something, and those are when he was like, by the house, he's already talked about this, he wants to go back and so I just, we got always be hired for, and I could have any of them.
I made sure to sign up for that. One of the schools where they advertise. Yeah, I put that link in there. Actually, it once or something, so I signed up for that one and $8. Like, all right, I think that. But this is really business.
First of all, her job is as an HR person. As a singer, she has a
And another minute. Yeah, I mean, that's not. Yeah, I was. Well, as I said, she is really, I send. All right. I hate interrupting sharing of wins and, but, one of the things that we don't do enough is we talk about our problems a lot, which again, we should lament. It's in the Bible. It's okay. God lamented for 5 chapters. But we're able to do that as well. But we should also be celebrating, all the different wins. So if people are, willing to share, what are some of the first that you've seen over the years? Okay. Definitely. Is there anyone specific that comes to mind? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that?
Person, and she's very, she's just.
Yeah. Yes. That's awesome. That's awesome. Did she keep in touch with them?
So.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's always awesome. I love when small group leaders for our teams stay in touch with them for college and makes me wonder why we don't do that. I mean, how many times? I mean, we all remember it, right? Going back to our high school, like, oh, I'm gonna walk through the halls and everyone's be like, Chris is back. Even though no one ever thought of me that way in high school. And, you know, it's like kind of like a teacher's like, oh yeah, where you get that part in class? You know, but I mean, like, we don't really do that in churches, right? It's like once the teens leave, it's not like, oh, when are they coming back, or do they know that they can come back, or do they know that this is their home parish until they find their own home parish. So yeah, that's one of those qualities and characteristics we look for. We try to encourage in our not just in our catechists, but our other volunteers as well. What are some of the other fruits that you guys?
During that period. Ministry that they might be interested in people in that
Right.
and continue to sustain.
Yeah.
And we gather at my house every year. We have a
That's awesome. That's really cool. Do you mind how that started? Like,
the program didn't move out of parents, but there's still an area.
yeah, definitely.
Conservation for the last years, this past year, I have a woman who talked to me a lot about what she might be able to do. And it was Rebecca, and just about
It's awesome. That's really good. It's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Other stories?
I wasn't thinking in terms of RCIA, but I'm a part of RCIA team for 2 parishes. And one of the young men that were going through the program in his 20s, I asked him to do a testimonial at our confirmation retreat. And it was the best thing I ever did because he was sharing his growth, where he started and when he didn't believe and where he is now. And it was so interesting because he talked to the young people as if to say, you know, you don't know what you're missing.
Right.
This is it. And he was so uplifting that the kids were really, really listening to him. So being a part of his growth, watching him give spiritual growth for young people coming into, you know, their last sacrament was really a very exciting time as well.
Was it easy to ask him? I mean, like, it seemed like it was easy to identify because you saw him growing. How was he receiving the invitation to?
Oh, he was very, very excited. He was that kind of young man. Once he found himself really wanting to become Catholic, he was very excited. He's still excited. He kind of would have loved to have been a catechist, but we were giving him time for his own growth. But for him to share his journey in terms of young people, what was appropriate was kind of really mattered to the young people coming up into this sacrament. And he was awesome.
Awesome.
Yeah, we hope to utilize it in the future. You know,
Definitely.
his talents.
Especially when you have willingness to witness. Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely.
It's another hand.
I was just thinking of a young lady who was a little sister. She would come along, you know, to our quarter meetings. And she was always a little bit on the shy, you know, the shy side of the pastor, like, you know, like volunteer. soft and very fast.
Right.
And, you know, and come to 10th grade, you know, she volunteers to be a reader, and confirmation is at the cathedral, and she's up there, you know, reading for the confirmation. Talked a little bit, you know, in our group about how important it is, like, for the families, to the family involved. You know, have that, you know, that family support. You know, I put out we had, for the first time since I've been at St. Thomas, we had this big procession. And I put out a shout out, put out a shout out for someone to, you know, carry the cross. And, you know, have to handle. So a mom emailed me, maybe this young man is, you know, somewhere on the spectrum, so I was like, concerned that, you know, I've never done this. This gentleman, you know, so it was so beautiful because then his brother, who he looks up to, and his mom were candle holders. It was so beautiful, and it started to kind of misty, you know, rain or whatever. And again, you know, I'm such a control freak. I was like, okay, you know, are we still gonna, you know, I was kind of like walking kind of like in the road next to him up to where the bank was, so we could have a shortcut. And I started to drizzle, and I looked at him and I said, and so just then, it stopped raining. It was like, you know, talk about the spirit. I mean, there was no more drizzle. It was still, you know, the winds of the spirit, but no rain. And he did beautiful.
Yeah.
So sometimes, you know, just that invitation.
Sure.
You know, such beauty.
Definitely. All right, now I want you to all tell me a story at the time where you gave out curriculum, or turned on a video, or gave someone a book and their life was changed. Just kidding. My point is, like, everyone's story, and granted, I asked you to tell me about like an individual or something like that, but every one of your stories involved personal connection, right? Whether it was with a specific volunteer or yourself and that individual. And nothing seemed to happen like overnight. It wasn't like I said to you, Jesus, and they were like, Jesus! And they were like, sold all their possessions, you know, gave their life to the church. And I think so many times we, right, it's that silver bullet, that quick fix, that if we give them if we give them St. Mary's Press, if we give them, you know, I'm just not trying to trash any publishers, but if we give them this, or subscribe, if everyone subscribes to form, or let's get all the Matthew Kelly books, or, you know, things like that, we're like, then we'll evangelize all of Albany, right? And those are tools, and they're helpful, and they're good. But they lack the personal connection. They lack the invitation, right? And so, yeah.
What I'm hearing to that is that we have to say yes. That we don't say no. We have to say, yes, please come. I'll make it work. Yes, please do it. We'll make arrangements, we'll make it work. Yes, please come, and just always being that open and welcome, and always saying that yes to bring them in.
Yes and no. Yes, we have to be open to this way the spirits lead us, but not to the detriment of your integrity. Because there's a lot of times, and I'll get into this a little bit later, there's a lot of times where we're like, oh my gosh, I can't say no to anyone in the church, because if I say no, then they'll walk away. If you look through scripture, example of Jesus and the young rich man, it's a great example where Jesus is like, no. He didn't say no, but the young rich man, like, you know, how many times has this happened in church where you're like, someone's like, okay, I want to go through our CIA, and you're like, great. Well, we've got these gatherings where we're doing this, and we want you to do this, and we want you to do this, and they're just like, well, I can't make every week. If I just made it once and thought about it and then show up, oh, we not doing it on the Easter Vigil? Could I show up maybe a week later? If we do it a Friday night, we're like, oh yeah, sure, just don't leave the church. And we're just like, and next thing we know, we're burning the candle at both ends and exhausting and wearing ourselves out, and then we're resentful towards the church. So the answer to that question is yes and no. But we'll talk this afternoon about how to manage those expectations and the workflow. But in the meantime, what I want you to think about is the importance of not getting stuck in the doing of ministry and being present in the ministry. You know, the Martha versus the Mary. And so many times we put so much emphasis on the Martha moments. Like, I have to get this done. I have to do this. We have to coordinate 100,000 people. We have all these people coming. But sometimes the best ministry we do, the stories that keep us doing this, are those one-on-one encounters that we have with us. All right, before we get into lunch, and I know this is always the toughest part because the angriness may start to come in. I want us to think not just about the people in the pews, but the people who are not in the pews. So on that worksheet, who are you trying to reach, right? And again, I apologize. Not everyone is in youth ministry and or children's ministry, but in addition to growing young disciples that are parish, we have to reach those who rarely come to church, even those who have never been. To reach them, we have to start out by knowing. And there you have a number of questions. What are the dynamics of their school, or it could be their work environments? How do they spend their time and their money, or their parents' time and money? What appears to be priorities in their life, and what does their relationship or lack thereof with the church look like? I want to be very, very clear. Don't think nationally. Don't think generally. Think specifically in your zip code, in your parish boundaries. Who are the people that you are trying to reach? Not the people who you're trying to awaken, right? Like, these are not the people who sometimes show up to church or are always showing up to church, right? So those people we're not trying to reach, we're trying to awaken those people, empower those people. Who are the people you are trying to reach that don't grace the doors of your church, have never been to church, or haven't been to church in a long time? Does that make sense? All right, and think about your paradigm. If you're in children's youth ministry, young people, families, if you're in RCIA, adults, whatever you feel like is your target audience. We'll give you about 5 to 7 minutes to. What were some of the things that you can tell me about your mission field, about the people you're trying to reach? Yeah.
Nowadays, it's more grandparents are bringing the kids to religion, excuse me, terminology, faith formation, and you don't see the parents at all. So, I mean, I had a, for instance, this weekend, like the grandmother wanted to go to mass right after to pick up her grandchild. And the kid comes out and goes, no, Mom said I don't have to go because I've already got faith formation. And I'm like, so, little Johnny, I go, you do need to realize that it goes hand in hand, and I tell the grandma, I go, you tell your daughter, that's, I'm sort of getting a little more aggressive. I know.
So,
it's just, it just boggles my mind because I grew up with a very Italian Catholic mother, who would hit me with a spoon, so it's just, I don't understand how, we're gonna send our kids to faith formation, but we're not gonna follow through and go to mass.
So when you reached out to the mom, what did she say?
This is also the same family that was gonna give their second grader a choice if he wanted to be baptized when he was already in first Eucharist, and we needed to be baptized prior to his first reconciliation. So that's been like 2 years I've been trying to, get committed faith formation.
Yeah.
So, but hallelujah, last week I got baptized.
But tell me a little bit more about, and maybe not that family situation, but why do you think it was such a challenge for the mom or the parents to bring that child and accompany their kid through the faith formation?
I mean, she's got a couple kids, so she's probably got 3 kids, and this child is the oldest in 2nd grade. And, I've seen him in church once, and she usually gets up before, Eucharist, and they're gone, because the kids are a little unruly. But my whole thing is, I always tell parents, it doesn't matter how unruly they are, that's how they learn to be able to sit for 45 minutes. Give them something, I don't care. Give them a prayer, well, again, give them like an iPad or whatever, I'm not really big into that. I mean, I have a special needs child, and he's that fine, but plus it's my child, so that's different. So I don't know. I don't know why these parents are just so disassociated with, they think that they're doing the right thing by sending them to faith formation, but there's no follow through. And I think that's the problem. That's where we're at this stage, like in 2023. I think most parents are very disconnected, and they have things on their mind. They got this to do, that to do. Kids got hockey practice, and then he's got to go to soccer practice, and then the daughter's got to go to dancing, and then she's going to basketball practice. It's too much. I think the parents have too much, and we let our kids do too much. So I think that there needs to be a priority, and church has always been that for everything.
How many can relate to that experience? All right. So what are you guys doing Saturday? Yeah.
I'm doing something experimental tonight.
Oh. What? Where can I come?
I'm serious. Seriously, I am doing something that I don't usually do. And that is I am having our beginning of the year faith formation parent meeting, grades 1 through 8, in one of our churches.
Okay.
Not in a meeting hall, not in the school hall, not in the school,
In
in the church.
Right.
Why? Because I am going to bring them back to their roots in Catholicism for their child. If they've done nothing from baptism till now being in the program, I want to bring them back to baptism.
Yeah.
Their commitment at that time and what that meant for them. And that's where I'm beginning.
Okay.
So it's something I'm challenging myself, our catechist, just to bring them back, no matter what it ends up being. Maybe it will be good, maybe it will not.
Yeah.
Maybe they'll feel, oh boy, they're being overwhelmed. I'm not planning to overwhelm them, but I want to bring them back to their roots of why they began.
Right.
And as was just being spoken about, the disconnect coming to class.
Yeah.
Kids are coming to classes, but they are not following through. Parents are not following through with torture.
Sure.
So that's my change. I'm trying to change the place and the meaning for my meeting.
And I think that's awesome that you're trying that. I'll be praying for you.
Please.
But I want to, something that's been sitting with me, like personally, also professionally, right? Because what you were sharing, I can relate to. So it's like, so I have a 13-year-old son and a 10-year-old son. Matthew loves baseball. It's his life. He's playing travel ball. That was a huge decision in our family because we play 2 sports a year. One in the fall, one in the spring. Winter, it's our time to ski, travel, summertime, same thing. And he got to the point where he was just so good at rec that he was getting bored and he loves baseball. And he came to us, he was like, I'm gonna play travel ball. This was going into 7th grade. And we're like, all right, here are the rules. We set really strict parameters and everything along those lines. And so we've been, navigating that. We found a league that doesn't travel far. We were like, can't miss mass. Like you have these obligations. School, they always come first, right? Before baseball. My wife and I, we have really good friends, and kids about Matthew and Ben's age. And I was sitting down with the dad the other day, and he's got 3 daughters, and all his daughters play in 2 soccer leagues year-round throughout the year. And he was just lamenting. Chris, I'm so stressed out. I can't do this. Like, it's hard getting kids to church and everything like that. I said, Mitch, it's like, why? Where did you think it was a good idea to play for 2 sports per kid per season, like in that capacity? And he's just like, well, they really want to play with their friends. It's like, yeah, well, if your kids really wanted to, like, you know, play with knives, we'd allow them to do that, right? And granted, he's a really good friend, so I can be frank and say, hey, you know what, like, be brave, say to your kids, like, hey, we're not gonna play this kind of sports, right? Now, the personal part of me is kind of like, where did we start getting into that trap that our kids had started playing all the sports, right? And I don't want to just pick on sports because I think that's unfair. I think that's escape. Because there's so many other things you can replace with sports with, you know, for real. But I think so many times in church world, we don't ask those questions. We just say, well, when I grew up in my Catholic family, my parents threatened me to go to hell if I didn't go to church, right? You know, I mean, but where it hits me personally is I'm one of five. I have 4 sisters, and none of them go to church. None of them are families in church, and I work for the church. And my parents, who are divorced, like my dad, who was difficult to grow up with, he still goes to church. My mom, when she feels like it, you know. And it's like one of those things where I'm like, what house did I grow up in? Maybe it was my grandmother dragging me during the summers when I'd spend them with her in Staten Island, New York, to St. Sylvester's to altar serve, which I hated because it's like 6 o'clock in the morning to altar serve. But maybe it was that. I don't know. But I do know that when I talk to my sisters about church, that the reason it's not a priority is because of all these different things that happened in their life that shaped it. And maybe it's the patriarchy. Maybe it's because there was a priest or a DRE or a youth minister that they had bad on it. Maybe it's because they heard a homily that hit them at the wrong time, even though the priest was right, it was wrong in the sense of like how it impacted them and everything like that. So what my point is that there's 1,010 different reasons why we walk away from God or church. And I think we have to be careful as a church to put it up into the fact that, oh, it's sports, oh, it's business, oh, it's all these things. And that's where we have to sometimes get down into the trenches with these families, these adults, these kids, and not tell them what they need to do, but ask them how. And so some of these questions that were on the exercise and the purpose of this exercise, this is something that you all need to do as staffs, with your volunteers, with your committed people, even if you're working with teens or adults, to talk about evangelization. What does the mission field look like? I have a neighbor who I was sharing with someone. I live in a very Jewish neighborhood in Baltimore, Pikesville, it's called. And it's actually the most densely populated most densely populated Jewish community in the country, even more densely populated than Brooklyn, right? And so basically when Saturday rolls around, everything's shut down. Like you can't even get bagels on Saturday. Like what's the point of that, right? You know, you have to go to the supermarket, you know. But no, I mean like, but one of the things that is just, so I have this neighbor Balaj, and he's Hungarian and Jewish, and yet he paints, but he's so fascinated with the story of St. Paul. You know, there's times where he obviously knows what I do, and over the years, we lived next to each other for 15, 16 years, and he's like, hey Chris, I want to ask you questions, talk to you about St. Paul. And I was like, all right, let's do it. He, a couple of years ago, went on this pilgrimage to basically follow Paul's journeys, you know, because he wanted to redepict the cities like Ephesus and Philippi, or all these different ancient cities, just to see what it would look like and how Paul did it. And we're sitting down and talking about it in his research. He discovered that Paul would spend days, and I think we know this because it's in scripture, but he would spend days just observing the community, just observing how the market worked, how finances work, how philosophers work, and all that kind of stuff. And I think one of the most famous examples of that is in Acts, when Paul is at Areopagus. He's talking about the unknown God. Because he must have been watching those philosophers. He must have been watching those leaders just talk about, you know, faith and different gods and everything like that. You know, he was able to speak to their world and say, I admire your devotion towards your religion, but that unknown God that you keep wondering about, I know him. Let me tell you about it. Right? And I think there's a lot of times where we expect people to come to us but we need to go to them. And not just go to them and just say like, hey, come tonight to this youth event, or come tonight to this event, or come Sunday to Mass. But we need to sit down and say like, how do people, like where do people congregate? Where do people go? What are the conversations like on the sidelines? What are people talking about? Like, are people getting coffee? Are people working at their home? Like, what's the big activity that has everyone drawn? Like, what are people watching on social media? What's the latest movie that people are binging on Netflix? You know, and we have to be asking those questions. And I know that those questions take a lot of time to analyze. Again, this is a part of the slowing down, but what it helps you understand is why people do what they do. In our congregation, we have a large Spanish-speaking population. In fact, over the last couple of years, our parish has become more and more multicultural, to the point where the majority of our students are young people that are Hispanic, many of them are either first or second generation coming from El Salvador, Mexico, mainly those two countries and everything. And so what we're realizing is that some of these students that we're dealing with, one of the reasons why students will come to our ministry is if we serve food, because they're starving, they're hungry, they're relying on school lunches for multiple accounts, you know, things like that. So if we provide food, it's not just for that 13-year-old kid like my son who's just going to eat like 10 bags of chips, right? But it's some of these kids who are, this is the only meal we have, right? Now, that's a tangible need that we're supplying, but at the same time, they're like saying, wow, the church cares about me and the hunger, and I'm going to listen to what they have to say, right? Same thing with family. Is like one of the things that we've started to look at and we're experimenting with is we have a CYO, a huge CYO program in the diocese. We have CYO soccer and basketball. And recently we have a stipend staff person who is overseeing our children's learning board, Anthony. He's doing a great job, but I realized, I learned, you know, about a year ago that he really played college baseball, ran sports leagues up in New York where he's from, and everything. I was like, hey, would you help me tackle the whole sports thing? Like, how can we engage this? And so he's basically been going just to different games on weekends, listening to parents, listening to what's going on in their lives. And, you know, it's just the big thing that has kind of emerged from it is that parents are so concerned about disappointing their kids because they felt disappointed by their parents. And, you know, sometimes, like when people make borderline ex-millennial, right? When people are like, oh, you're always involved in your kids' activities and things like that. I think it's partly because like my parents never came to my things. Sometimes I wish they did. The things I do, and for those of you who are parents, right? There are things that you do as a parent because your parents did them. There are things you did as a parent because you didn't. And so sometimes we're quick to judge what parents do and don't do. I think the reason why parents will pull up a chair and sit at practice and be with their kids is because they wanted that from their parents. And so what does that tell you? That they're not that we blame boomers or people older than that or whatever it might be. But we recognize that maybe people are praying for Abba Father. There's a lot of father groups out there, right? There's a lot of parent groups out there. Maybe that's one of the things where before we start telling parents like, hey, you know, come to this, get your kids catechized, sacramentalized, and ship them off to Rome, right? That we really sit down and say like, hey, listen, that unknown God you've been chasing after on the sports field, that unknown God that you've been watching on the phone or on television, who he is. Let me tell you. And again, as much as we'd love to scale that, organize that, and there are ways to do that, which we'll talk about later, it really starts with those relationships. Because again, the kid who comes back, the adult who gets a witness talk, the teens that get involved, the families that are engaged. If someone took the time to say like, a God-sized hole that you have in your life, I might not know everything about it, but I can show you ways that we can grow that. Something far beyond it. So I just want you to kind of take that thought as we get ready for lunch. Lunch is you're going to get angry, you're hungry. That's something I just want you guys to sit on and think about as we get ready for lunch and then let me pray for us, and less food, would digest, get their extra boost of caffeine, whatnot. All right, excellent. So, 7 years ago, I found myself everyone laugh as if people missed out. That was the funniest thing ever. So about 7 years ago, I found myself standing outside my house, washing cookies and cream milkshake off the front door. And it wasn't some juvenile prank that had just taken place. It was the epitome of what ministry felt like at that time in my life. I had recently built a solid relationship with a local Chick-fil-A. I think I saw a couple Chick-fil-A's up here and everything like that.
So far, only one or two.
Yeah, sometimes they're a little rare and everything like that. Well, again, they're not paying me to say this, but Chick-fil-A is really great at partnering with churches and giving discounts and the budget and everything like that. So I built this relationship with local Chick-fil-A. At the parish I was at, every Thursday night, we had our high school program. And I'd probably order about like 20, 25 sandwiches. We'd sell them like for $1 or something like that, just to kind of cut costs. And whenever you cater with Chick-fil-A, if you ever do their sandwiches, they'll give you like this big heater bag, right? Like, and plug it in, it keeps the sandwiches warm. And so every night after youth ministry, you'd have to return it back. And because I'd always be the last one to lock up, I'd be the one that would return the bag. Just kind of felt easy and simple in that way. And so we did that. I did that for a couple of weeks, and then one day, the manager, who I started to get to know, his name was Jordan. He said, like, he would ask me how did ministry go out that day, and I told him, oh yeah, a couple of kids, just this happened and everything. And then finally, one Thursday night, he was like, hey, Chris, because you work so hard for the church and everything like that, we want to support you. Anything you want on the menu, it's on us. Anything? And he was like, anything. And so I was like, without hesitation, one cookies and cream milkshake. I'm sure, not a problem. Definitely hook you up. And as I sat there, I started to think about my wife, who I loved dearly. Her name's Kate, and two boys. And she was home by herself taking care of those boys. And I was like, what kind of husband, what kind of man would I be if I did not bring home something for my wife? So I went to Jordan. And I said, Jordan, if it's not a problem, can I have another milkshake? I'll pay for this one. She's like, no, Chris, you've done enough for the church. Like, this one is on us as well. And I said, Jordan, thank you so much. And I'm just picturing in my mind coming home through the door with 2 milkshakes, my wife waiting for me to come home, smiling and being like, oh, my hero. And so I hopped in my car and proceeded to drive home from Hunt Valley, where the Chick-fil-A was located, back to Pikesville, where I lived in. And on average, with no traffic, it's about a 15-minute drive, right? 15-20-minute drive. And I've got to drive on Interstate 83 and then hop onto the Baltimore Beltway, which again during the day it's a little it's annoying, it's bad traffic, but at about 10 o'clock at night when I'm leaving the Chick-fil-A, no one's on the road. However, as I think we've all learned, the best time to do construction on highways is at night. Right? So I'm like hitting the stop and go traffic, and all of a sudden I hit this section of go, and the next thing I know, a car pulls out in front of me, and so I slam on the brakes, and at that moment I'm reminded of a physics lesson. Students, I forget which law it was, but an object that is in motion stays in motion unless the force acts upon it. Well, even though the car stopped, the milkshake and its cup holder continued, and the only thing that stopped the motion of the milkshake was the dashboard of my car. So I get home. Don't worry, I had finished my milkshake by this point. But my wife's poor milkshake was all over the dashboard of the car. And so I went home, my wife was up, I apologized to her, she's like, you know what, I wasn't even expecting that, so it's It's not a problem. So the next week I was like, I'm gonna make this right. So I went to Jordan and was like, Jordan, can I get 2 milkshakes? He was like, Chris, you're part of the church. This one's such polite, really working hard with this. And so, gave me one of those cardboard carriers, and as I'm walking out, they're locking up. I trip over the steps and milkshakes.
Oh my God.
And then for the next 4 weeks, the same thing happened over and over again, where it was either getting out of the car, at my house, or something like that, and these just milkshakes would just never make it to the front door of my house. So finally, 6 times the charm, right? I pull up to my house, it's late, it's like 11 o'clock at night. I'm like, I am going to get these milkshakes sorry, I finished mine. No, I had not, because I started to feel guilty that I was finishing mine before these incidents were happening. So I'm like, you know what, I'm going to make this work. And so I grabbed the milkshakes. I had both milkshakes in my hand, right? And I left my bag and everything else in the car. I got these milkshakes, I'm gonna bring them inside, and I get to the front door, and of course, what do I say? I grab my key from my pocket, right? So I'm sure all of you are thinking like, oh, so what did Chris do? He put them down, or he went back to the car, put them in a cup holder, or don't worry, I had a better idea. Attached to my house, to the right of the door, is a mailbox, right? And the mailbox has and so like you're thinking maybe, okay, he opened it up and put it in the mailbox. Yeah. No, I put it on top of the slanted roof of the mailbox. Because I was just like, that's where it will stay. So, it's like one of those things where I fit right there. Okay, that's good. Got my keys out of my pocket, opened up the door, opened the door up. All I had to now do was this motion. And I'd be safe. But by some act of God, my hand didn't go like this. My hand went like this. And as I went to grab the milkshakes, my hand then went like this. Throwing said milkshakes all across our front door.
Do you have a ring cam?
What's that? I wish I did at the time, but no, it was 7 years ago. And fortunately, my wife, my family was all asleep, and despite the noise that I made with expletives that I shouted, no one woke up. And so I took a deep breath. I went inside, got some cleaning supplies, closed the door, turned on the hose, and as I watched the milkshake that was like dripping off like some horror film, dripping from the door, I remember letting out a deep sigh and murmuring words. And it was the first time I'd ever said those words aloud. And it scared the crap out of me. So much to the point where I'm like, go shove that back inside, put it down there, and I'm burnt out. How could I be burnt out? I was a successful parish, or a successful ministry. I would write books. I'd be going around speaking. How could I, Christopher Wesley, burnt out? I was on the top of the world. Shoved it down inside. And then 6 months later, that burnout just manifested itself in the most profound way ever. I'd love to say that was I learned my lesson, and that was the last time I'd ever burned myself out. But, the pandemic came away. But I can't blame the pandemic for also feeling burnt out during that time. In fact, thank God for that time, as painful as it was, because it reminded me of this principle that you have to slow down and work smarter and not harder. I mean, I'm not sure what you did during the pandemic, but there were times where someone in my family would just have that breakdown. We walked away and be like, we're having a moment, and anytime I had to self-soothe, it was watching Tiger King or Korean horror films and eating sourdough bread. And I even had a name for my sourdough. I started Hula Hula. And just did anything to survive that, right? And if you're feeling stuck right now, if you're feeling like this is hard, like running a marathon barefoot over broken glass while carrying the elephant cart, I hear you. Because it just feels like every year there's this risk of burning out. And for the last few years, we've needed to take a step back in the bigger picture, because as much as we say, oh, the pandemic, we're 3 years out, there's new things that pop up, whether it's church scandal, whether it's shootings, whether it's something that happens right in your community or affects the whole country or the whole world. There's always going to be something that's going to accelerate us, where we're going to react. Again, we can't be reactive. We have to think of something comprehensive and slow ourselves down. The reason I think we're struggling to bring people back to church is because for too long we've been relying on the same methods, and we're struggling to build something comprehensive, something a little bit more, I don't want to say systematic, but something a little bit more relational, authentic, personal. Someone who works in ministry and coaches ministry leaders, I found that by focusing on the 6 elements that I'm sure this afternoon, that we can not only put together a comprehensive plan, but grow a healthy ministry that brings us joy. Because one of the things that saddens me is like men and women like yourselves who are doing great work, but the joy has disappeared. And one of our big missions at Marathon Youth Ministry is to help you fall in love with ministry. Some of you get back in ministry. And so one of the ways that we do that are providing workshops, coaching, cohorts, content that fuel your formation, specifically your human formation. It's sometimes something that's overlooked. And so, yeah, that's what I want to say. So on your worksheets, jump through the 6 elements. Spoiler alert, the 6 elements are there, but before you read ahead, the first one I want to look at is our leadership development, right? Investing in ourselves. And I've taught, how many of you were on the Zoom a couple weeks ago? All right, so some of this is recap of that, and if you find it redundant, good, that means you listened, you absorbed it, but I always think this is important to review the church, right? Again, we have a huge self-care problem in the church, right? As a coach, I've noticed that many of my clients who work in parish ministry are motivationally driven to serve, right? And that should make sense, right? We are called to serve. We want to serve and love others. We want to show others the love of God. But what gets them going in the morning is this idea of helping other people. And however, while having that motivation drive is key, it can also lead us to burnout. It can lead us also to burnout, but it can also lead us to putting other people's needs ahead of our own. In 2005, and I mentioned this last time, the USCCB came out with a document called Co-workers in the Vineyard. Just to get my show of hands, how many of you have a copy or read a copy or at least have heard of this before? You haven't heard of it before, you weren't at my school. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, Co-workers in the Vineyard. So it's funny, again, bishops are not paying me to do this, but like it's a very important document. It's a very good document because in it, it talks about the ways that we as laity are formed and the importance of investing in laity. I believe every layperson as well as clergy should read this document because it explains how we can do this for the long haul and continue without that mission. And one of the areas it stresses is our formation. It says this, it says lay ecclesial ministers, just like the ordained, need and deserve formation, high standards, effective methods, and comprehensive goals. High standards, that's why they brought me in. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully. I don't know why y'all laugh.
I think it was more about us, not you.
Lay ecclesial ministers, just like ordained, need and deserve formation, high standards, effective methods, and comprehensive goals. I love this because basically it says everyone who works in ministry needs and deserves high quality formation. Everyone who devotes themselves to the work of the church needs and deserves high quality formation. Notice it doesn't say everyone who is paid by the church needs and deserves high quality formation. Notice it doesn't say everyone who wears a collar or takes vows deserves and needs high quality formation. Everyone, volunteers, the faithful, all of us deserve and need high quality formation. Because ministry is really hard. I mean, it is more than just pizza and dodgeball if you're working with teams. I mean, middle school ministry alone is like learning how to hurt cats while you're on fire or going across the Atlantic Ocean, right? I mean, and if you don't know what that means you're not in middle school ministry, right? And while I love what the bishops put this together, it's important to note that our formation as leaders is something also dictated by canon law, which says laypersons who devote themselves permanently or temporarily, I love permanently or temporarily, right? To some special service of the church are obliged to require the appropriate formation which is required to fulfill their function properly. So, if I'm a manager or if I'm a pastor and I see that my staff, my volunteers are not functioning properly, I gotta look back at this and say like, oh yeah, are we forming them? Or am I just expecting them to do? Am I frustrated at people fairly because if I'm asking them to show up on time, if I'm asking them to, fill out this paperwork and everything like that, am I forming them properly or am I just expecting to layperson, us, who bound themselves permanently or temporarily to some special service of the church? Again, special service does not just mean youth ministry, does not just mean children's ministry. Any special service of the church are obliged to require the appropriate information to require to fulfill the function properly. And I know your diocese knows this, right? I know that a lot of leaders in the church know this. And maybe this doesn't surprise you. Maybe you know that you need more formation, but the problem is you don't have the time. Right? Who has the time to sit in a room for a whole day when there are kids to catechize, when there are parents to lead, when there are liability forms to fill out and get in, and buses to book, and all these different things. But the problem is that when you don't have the time, or when you focus on it, when you don't take the time to form yourselves, you're running on empty, and you can't give what you don't have. So if you're not filling your cup, then how can you fill other people's cups? So I don't know how many of you manage staff. Maybe you don't manage staff. Maybe you manage volunteers and everything. I think this is important. This is something that you have to make a priority. And in fact, if it means sacrificing some kind of programmatic element so that you can do more formation, it's key. So at our parish, every Sunday from 10:15 to or 10:30 to 11:30, 11:45, we have our children's faith formation programs. And then on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, we have small groups for middle school and high school students. And so the idea is that, asking our volunteers to come back for a third night or a second night seems really tough. So what we decided to do is actually going to happen this week with All Saints Day and All Souls Day falling on a Wednesday and Thursday and everything like that. We're not going to have middle school and high school groups because we want people to go to Mass. And we decided that on November 5th, that Sunday, instead of having faith formation, we're telling all the parents to keep their kids at home and all of our volunteers to come in for training. And part of the reason is they already have that Sunday blocked away as a way to train. So it's not anything new to their schedule. And, we're encouraging families just to spend time. We're also communicating to families. We're spending this time to develop our team. Because we want parents, we want kids, we want teens to know that their formation matters. And because their formation matters, we want to make sure the formation of their catechists, their small group leaders, our volunteers is a priority. And so we do that about 3 times a year. We can't cancel. I mean, it's already pre-scheduled where we don't have programmatic ministry because we want to spend that forming the men and women who are serving, and they've already committed that time. So it's not adding another thing on the calendar. So again, if you manage a team of volunteers, and it doesn't matter if you have 2 volunteers in your ministry. It doesn't matter if you have 100 volunteers in your ministry. Spending time to form them is a priority because here's the thing, especially if you have a small team of volunteers, the more confident that team is, the more that they'll do it. Another thing that we have to look at is we have to look at our meetings, right? I mean, I know that some of us, if you really like meetings, it's because you're an extrovert, you're social, and you love people. Right? Willing to overlook bad agendas and drama and all that stuff, right? I mean, for the rest of us, meetings can be a little bit painful, it can be a little bit hard. But that's where we have to look at meetings and say, okay, in our meetings, how are we spending time growing together? You know, not just like, can I send this out in an email, but are we praying together? Are we growing together? Are we, you know, raising up together? And so again, I know that we're talking about volunteer formation, but if you're managing a team, like we have to do that. Now for ourselves, first I want to applaud you all for being here today, right? Because I'm sure, especially for those of you who got the drive, that this was a little bit of a sacrifice. I'm sure for some of you who maybe have kids that you have to pick up from school, or think about activities tonight, or you have ministry tonight, right? Taking the whole day to listen to some guy from Baltimore, it was a risk, right? And you got rewarded, what can I say? But in all reality, taking that time to form ourselves seems like a sacrifice, but it shouldn't. And I'm not just talking about formation in the pastoral sense, right? How to do ministry better. But when are you taking time to pray? One of the things that I encourage I oversee a staff of about 5 people, all part-time except for our admin. And I say to them, 1 day a month, you're not taking off, but you're using that time to spend with God. So if you work 10 hours a week, you know, take whatever, 2 hours, and instead of that 2 hours of coming in, go to adoration, go plan a retreat day for yourself, go spend it with God. It's your spiritual formation is essential. And I do that for myself as well. Once a month, I meet with the spiritual director, and I don't take off. My pastor has approved it and everything like that. And here's the thing: if your pastor gives you a hard time, they've got all these rights too. You know, like this is something that they're supposed to do as well. And, you take that time with God, right? You know, another thing is, I think I mentioned this to a couple of people. I was at our pastoral staff day for our archdiocese yesterday, right? So even though I go around and speak and talk about different things, I know that I don't know everything, and even the things I know I need to do what I know. So coming to workshops like this, coming to gatherings like this, that's important for your pastoral formation, right? Your intellectual formation. You don't have to study theology on your own free time. It's part of your work time. Your pastor is expecting you to work at a certain level. You know, it doesn't mean that you have to squeeze in reading canon law or some kind of catechesis or whatnot for yourself on your own free time. You can sit at your desk or a coffee house or whatever, reading and studying your intellectual formation, because that is a part of your job. You can't give it. I know I'm really harping on this, and I know that for some of you that might be a real challenge. We'll talk a little bit about this later. You know, keep on pushing things later. But we can't afford to put our own needs aside. It's just like when they tell you when you get on an airplane, right? The mask falls if you're with a minor. Put your mask on first so that you can have oxygen to help them. You can't keep suffocating ourselves in ministry trying to help others. Healthy ministries not only have healthy leaders like yourselves, but they also have people who are growing a lot of God to form them. And it's not just critical of yourselves, but as I was mentioning before, it's critical of your team. So again, growing teams of volunteers, right? That's the second. So first element. Actually, before we get to this first element, second element, I want you to just take a minute on your sheets. It says invest in ourselves as leaders. And I want you to rate yourself right now. When you think about your formation as a leader, how are you doing? 10 being that you're doing great, you know, and you're just like a formation junkie, which comes in great. 1, you're completely empty. On a scale of 1 to 10, where are you on that formation scale? It's based off of what I said. What's maybe one thing you could change to improve? So you guys do this. The comprehensive ministry is investing in ourselves. Second, we spent a lot of times on Zoom. I'll talk about this growing Zoom calls, cultivating leaders. in my time of ministry, think that I would be good at this, right? That I'd be good at building teams of volunteers. And at my last parish, I had a much easier time doing it than I currently do. I really do think something's happening nationally that's really hard to recreate volunteers. I've been pretty good at recruiting volunteers over the years of delegating. That's another thing, right? Never forget, before the pandemic, we used to have our high school, middle school programs on Sunday night. And as we would have, we have a school attached to our parish, and so we use the gymnasium for the middle school program, and high school would be meeting in parish fellowship hall, and so there was a little bit of setup that needed to take place. As I mentioned, I never had my own space, so tables, chairs, all that kind of stuff needed to be set up. So I told my volunteers, I was like, hey y'all, I need you to show up at like 4:15 so that we can be ready to greet students at 5 o'clock. You know, and that was a huge ask because in Baltimore, right, everyone's a Ravens fan, 1 o'clock Ravens game, especially if it was supposed to notice that volunteers would sometimes come a little later than they should have, and all that kind of stuff. You know, people would show up, and I don't know what you guys, how you guys are with preparing. I've always grown up in a house where it's like, if you are on time, you're late, you know, like, you know, if you're 10 minutes early, you're on time or something along those lines. And so for me, 4 o'clock would roll around, 3:30 would roll around, and the space would be set up. You know, and I'm like, oh my gosh, people are coming in an hour and a half. We have to start setting it down. And so I started breaking out tables and chairs and everything like that. So my volunteers would show up at 4:15. Most of the setup was done. And so they were like, so that would happen each week. And I noticed that there was a pattern that leaders, more and more leaders weren't coming at 4, they were coming at 4:15. And then eventually they were coming at 4:30. And then eventually they were coming at 4:55. And then a lot at 5 o'clock. And I remember just being really frustrated with it. I was like, why are they getting up? Maybe I have to remind them and everything like that. And so I sent an email out to them as pastorally as I could. It was like, hey guys, I just really need your help. If you just be here at 4 o'clock, you know, or actually 4:15, that'd be so helpful. I really appreciate that, right? And so next Sunday rolls around, and I'm, you know, starting to set stuff up. And one of my volunteers came a little bit early at 4 o'clock. And her name's Jane, and Jane looks at me and she has a weird kind of like concerned look on her face. And I was like, "What's up, Jane?" And she's like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, and I wasn't okay. I was frustrated because here I am. It's hot out. I'm setting up the program. Volunteers hadn't shown up yet, even though it's a little bit early. I really wanted them there and stuff like that. I was like angry that I had to do all this stuff. But I said, like, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Why? She's like, you don't look okay. Are you feeling okay? And I was like, yeah, why? She's like, well, I'm kind of sweating a lot. And I looked down, well, and I had like old man sweat, like on my back, like my armpits, like the places I should mention and everything like that. And that's where a side tip for you all, always keep a spare change of clothes in your office because you never know when you're gonna need them. But I remember just being like, well, I'm busy setting up because no one's here on time. She's like, Chris, you told us 4:15 and it's like 4 o'clock and you're already setting up. And I was just like, yeah, but I just want it to be ready. And she's like, well, why didn't you tell us to get here earlier? And I was like, Jane, I was just like, I don't know, because then I'll probably be setting up at 2:30. And what she was telling me is, she's like, Chris, you're telling us that you need us, but your actions say something else. You're telling us that you need us, but our actions say something else. And y'all, it hit me so hard in the heart and the gut. And I was just like, you're right. So how many times are you recruiting volunteers, working hard, asking people for help? And you say, I need your help, I need your help, I need your help. And they show up to help. You're like, I got it. And I don't know about you, but after a while, like, I'm going to stop showing up because I don't feel needed. One of the reasons why people, especially young people, stop going to church is because they don't feel like they're involved. I was talking to someone earlier about music, right? And it's like, why don't people sing in church? It's because sometimes the music that we have doesn't performance, show, right? Why don't people serve in ministry? It's because it becomes an exclusive club of ushers or ministers or catechists, and, we don't need your help, we got it all under control. That's not what our faith teaches us, right? That's not what canon law says. Our jobs as directors or coordinators or lead volunteers is to empower the faithful to the church, not to do the ministry of the church, but to empower the faithful to the church. So how do we hand over control to the faithful? Well, it takes a lot of drinking. How do we hand control over to the church? We do that by building a dynamic team of volunteers, and it all starts with culture. It's all about culture, right? Culture. I know that's a word that's used too much, but building that team means finding people who are going to help you create an environment where young people, old people, their families, feel welcome and challenged to grow. The people you invite to serve need to embrace that culture. And you can have the smartest theologian or the most passionate missionary, but if they don't fit the team culture, they'll slow down. All right, we see this a lot in sports. You have as much talent, but if there's not teamwork, if there's not culture, then it's not going to shine through. Now, building a culture might sound exclusive. However, there are some basic tenets to a healthy team that breaks through that exclusive nature. The first thing is that greatness, right? I remember recently, as we've been trying to really build up our teams of volunteers in the parish, one of the things that we noticed, especially on Sunday mornings, is that our volunteers would come, right? It would be, we'd have 9 o'clock mass. 9 o'clock mass ends at 10-ish. And then our faith formation check-in started at 10:15, and then 10:30 is when we start. And we noticed that a lot of our volunteers would go to that 9 o'clock mass, and then they just rush into faith formation, right? And with that rush, it almost seemed like they were walking into the burning classroom with burning fire, and having to rescue kids, because they would always be like scattered and flustered and everything like that. And so we talked about it at one of our staff meetings, and I talked to some of our team leaders, and I said, listen, part of the problem is, even though we're coming from a prayerful place like Mass, we're then rushing into action to do it. We need to pray as a team. Because not everyone actually who's going to, who's a catechist who's actually going to Mass, they would go to Mass at other times. But we have to somehow slow things down, take that deep breath before we enter into the mission field. So we said, all right, at 10:10, 5 minutes before we start checking people in, we're going to pray together as a team. And I remember there was pushback. People were like, well, Chris, I'm not going to have enough time to set up my room and do all these things. And I was like, I get that. And we can address that. But we're not even praying. We're walking in, leaving the Holy Spirit at the door. We're not inviting God into our lives as a community, as a group. So that, because we're entering into this mission field, we got to do that together. And if we do that first, then we can figure out the logistics of helping you set up your space and all that kind of stuff. And we've been doing that for a couple of weeks now, and what we've noticed is people are less flustered when we're in the room. Actually, parents and kids are starting to witness us praying together as a group. They're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to drop my kid off half an hour early so I can get to Target. I'm gonna wait because they're praying and preparing themselves. And now I see that this church is taking it seriously. I'm dropping my kid off into the holy space, right? And that culture is helping us engage parents a little bit more, and parents. So praying together is huge. Sharing life with one another is also important, right? Sharing life with one another is essential. It's key. And I'm not saying you have to be best friends and go to the movies together and form a Dungeons and Dragons club or anything like that. But sharing life, no judgment on that, by the way. My son is beautiful. But sharing life with one another, like how well do you know your volunteers? Even if you have 2 volunteers, 3 volunteers, right? How well do you know those people? Are they married? Do they have kids? What are the kids' names? What do they like to do in their free time? Because there are those small things that you can do where you see them accomplish a goal or reach a milestone, and you can celebrate that situation with them. And that will create a culture where it's not just about, hey, thank you for doing the job, but thank you for being here. Massive growth rate. Just as you guys are growing here, how are you growing in your volunteers. Maybe doing a training, you don't feel equipped or ready to do that. Okay, what workshops can you bring them to? The diocese that's holding, or what retreats are happening in your diocese that you can encourage them to go on, or maybe there's a book that you can all read together that's focused on ministry, or hosting a Bible study or something like that. But how are you growing with your team? The more you do that, the more you build a culture. If you do those things with people you have, you'll find it's easier to attract new ministers. In addition to recruiting more people, you'll ensure that you're having the right ones jump on board too. If you have a healthy culture, that culture is palatable, you will attract the right people. Culture will attract the healthy culture will attract healthy people. Healthy ministries are not run by a few, they're run by many. And there's always more work for the faithful. And your job, again, as a ministry leader, is not to do the work of the faithful, but to empower the faithful to do the work that God has called them. So as a leader, you need to stop looking at the congregation as volunteers to get the task done, but a mission field where you're empowering them. All right, let's take another minute or two on a scale of 1 to 10. How well are you doing that, right now, building that culture, building that team of volunteers, and maybe what's one change that you can do? Now, if you don't work with kids, teams, working with adults, think of parents with families, right? Partnering with families, and I don't mean family in a programmatic way. I really want to be actually clear about this. Family ministry is an important ministry that the church should embrace, but we can't just resort it to a programmatic ministry, right? Family ministry is not programmatic ministry, it's something bigger. Just like youth ministry is not programmatic ministry, it's something more. And so again, if you work with adults, not mainly kids or teens, just think of this as families, right? So healthy ministries don't just partner with parents, they don't just partner with families. They walk with. And as someone who works for the church, right, a lot of people, at least in my congregation, are like, Chris, you got it easy. You're catechizing your kids probably all the time. They're going to grow up to be, both of them will be close. The church will make an exception and go back to 2 levels, right? No, but if that has an idea, that is. But my wife and I, we need help, right? I'm in ministry, she's in HR. Yeah, we're sometimes a total mess, right? And there's times where I come home and she comes home. We do this little trick that we learned from Dr. Brene Brown, where it's like on a scale, if for us to be a healthy family, we're at 100%. That means like where I am and where my wife is has to add up to 100%. So if we're having a rough day, I'll come home and I'm like, hey, hon, I'm at a 40, and she's like, that's okay. I'm at an 80, that adds up to 120. We're good, right? We can do this. But if there's a day where I'm at a 20 and she's at a 30, we're like, all right, we gotta look at what we're doing. We gotta shut things down. Spend some time with God, spend some time just resting and recouping. It's a trick that has worked. So, having 2 boys, 10 and 13, we're entering into that beautiful adolescence age. And those of you who have older kids, I get it, right? It's messy. And as someone who's worked in ministry with young people, I actually love the fact that I have a preteen and a teenager, because as annoying as they can be, I mean, it's fascinating just to see this theoretical parenting that I was doing for all these years come into fruition, right? And it's just like, my wife is like, is that normal? It is normal. Just wait till what happens next.
You're living case studies.
Yeah, living case study right now. It's coming home, right? So there was this one day where, it was one of those days where between activities and work, youth program and everything like that, my wife and I didn't really see or talk to each other until like 8 o'clock at night. The boys were getting ready for bed. This was about 2 years ago, and we're just kind of sitting and chatting, catching up, and she's like, "Oh, so what did you think about the email from Mrs. Wilson?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" Now, Mrs. Wilson was my son Ben's 3rd grade teacher, and I was like, "What?" Well, I was like, "Honestly, I haven't checked my personal email. I'll do that right now." Looked at it, and it said that my son Ben had been in a little fight on the playground at recess and got a home number. And I was like, "Oh, I didn't see this." And she's like, "Well, that's funny. Ben said you guys talked about it." list. And it happens, you say Benjamin, full name, you're in trouble. Benjamin Padgett, please come in here. So Ben walks into our bedroom and I'm like, hey Ben, so I understand that you got a home note and that you told mom that you and I had discussed this home note, which you didn't. First tell us about the situation. You told the situation. In his defense, he's been picked on a couple times, and he picked a kid, right? He picked a kid, and so and a home note's not a big deal. It's not detention. You get 3 home notes in a semester, you get detention, whatever. So we're like, hey, listen, not so much upset about the home note, because we understand what happens, but why? Like, we're not happy that you lied to your mother, and that this was something you tried to hide, because when you lie, we can't help you. We can't walk with you. Cried a little bit, gave hugs. It was like one of those moments where you're just like, you're awesome. Let's put this on Instagram, y'all. Like, just shame all the other parents out there. And so part of the home note is you have to sign it and return it. So my wife was like, Ben, is the home note in your yellow folder? He's like, yeah. And so she went right with that, brush your teeth, for we love you. My wife walks downstairs, gets the folder, walks back upstairs. And as she enters the room, she's like, you're not going to believe it. It's like, what? So she hands me the home note. And on the home note, the name Wesley. That's my son had forged my signature in pencil on the home note. He spelled my name wrong too. Picture of and we're like, oh my gosh, the little kid, he's learning. Where did you learn how to forge? Like, I didn't know whether to be impressed that he had the wherewithal to try this out, or to be disappointed that my son was trying to forge signatures. I mean, thank God we don't write checks anymore, right? So we called him back in, and we're like, Ben, what's this about? And he denies it. To this day, he did. He's like, I don't know how that happened. I must have signed it. We're like, kid, we caught you in pencil. You spelled Dad's name wrong. He doesn't even sign his name that way. And so it's like one of those things where we were just kind of at our wits' end, and we punished him for that. Forgery is where we draw the line in our household. And but I mean, it was like one of those things where it's like, I don't know whether to call my mom or my dad and be like, hey, how'd you deal with it when we forged our signatures on things? And then you get into the whole technological thing. There was a time where my oldest son accidentally purchased about $100 worth of comic books on Amazon while he was on his Amazon tablet. And it's just like, how do you parent that and things like that? And so, my point is, even though I work for the church, even though my wife is in HR and everything like that, we deal with and manage people, we need help as parents. And there's times, and we're learning this with a 13-year-old, that my son does not want to talk to me, but who does he want to talk to? Well, he'll talk to other adults, just not his parents. And so are there adults in his life that share the same values as us, that we trust, that he trusts, that can do that? And that's why as a youth minister, I love our small group leaders. Like Matthew, my oldest, has 2 years, Brian and Clint, who I know he can go and talk to about these things. He can talk to them about when parents are annoying, when he has a life question that he doesn't know how to address with us. And there's so many times where when we come to parent ministry or family ministry, we're like, hey, come to this event, come to this training, come to this program. And those are all good things, but that's where we need it. And that goes back earlier to that question of who's in the mission. How well do we know what families are dealing with? How well do we know what parents are dealing with? Are we really accompanying them, or are we just setting expectations that they will fail at trying to meet? And so I know that might seem like more work for us to do, but think about this too. How often do we call parents, this to brag on their kids, right? Because I'll tell you what, I feel like there's so many times where I get an email or a phone call from a coach or a teacher saying your son misbehaved, or your son did this, or your son, got in trouble doing that. Rarely there have been times, rarely do I get a phone call or an email that says, hey, I just want to brag on your son for a second. He said something really awesome. Today. Or I just want to let you know, I really like having your son on our team because of process. I tell you, when I do get those, when my wife and I get those, we're like, hold on. It's like, that is where all that shame that parents feel these days, that they experience on social media, it goes away because we're like, all right, one thing right. One thing right. And I'm not saying we let parents off the hook. I'm not saying we let families off the hook from the requirements and the things that we have to do, because we have to protect the sacraments, right? We have to protect the faith. But we also have to figure out how do we meet them where they are. Walk through those difficult times. So one of those things that we need to do is figure out, while we're running programmatic ministry, how do we make ourselves available to these parents? Even if they're stop dropping and rolling their kids, right? Stop the car and drop the kids off and going on down the street, right? We've got to figure out, how do we encounter parents? How do we encounter families? Maybe that's standing at the front doors of your church when mass is, right before the other after mass, even 15 minutes into mass, when that family's driving up, like, we got here, and just be like, yeah, you made it, instead of like, oh, you're late, father's in this homily, it doesn't count anymore, like, but how do we encourage them for that? How do we celebrate their families? If you have someone going through RCIA and you know that loved one that they have is dealing with a difficult time, or maybe something awesome has happened, right? Maybe someone has a grandchild over there. Like, how do you celebrate? How are you walking with them through the tough times and the good times? The more that we can accompany and partner with parents and family, the healthier that our church can be. And it shows that we don't just care about them meeting our quota, that we care about them as Christ. So just like the last 2 months, how are we with mentoring and accompanying parents and families? Still. I just want to be sensitive to time, so if I rush through this, don't worry, I'll leave time for Q&A as well. But the next element, right, is student leadership pipeline, right? The student leadership pipeline. And this is, regardless of the ministry that you're in, another way of looking at this is, how are you growing young? How are you growing young? A lot of people get scared about that terminology, or when I talk about developing a student leadership pipeline, it's like, are we ignoring the older parishioners? What about the men and women who have been faithful, who are, don't have young kids anymore, or our older congregation, or young adults? Like, why is growing up so important? And it's because, like, we always have to do things. One, it's not just about the future of the church, but I really do believe that one of the ways you can awaken the faithful, especially the older faithful, is by connecting with them. One of the ways that we can empower the faithful is by connecting with different generations, and doing that in a mentorship sort of way. Let me break that down for us. A lot of times we look at the student leadership as a club, but it's not. It's a process. It's a process that we're running. What I've found successful is a student leadership pipeline where you're inviting young people, not just teenagers, young people, to serve in the parish, connecting them with mentors, and developing them into leaders in those areas. See, a lot of times when we think about student leadership, we think about a club where they're going to do a service project, go on a service trip, things like that. Those things are good. But when we're talking about growing young and developing a student leadership pipeline, and you're thinking about the future of your ministry, whether it's RCIA, music ministry, youth ministry, children's ministry, ushers, different liturgical ministry, right? How are you growing young? How are you passing the baton into the next generation? How are you investing in the next generation? And how are you letting the next generation inspire current generations? And so if we invite teens and kids to be a part of a group, it's a part of an intergenerational. If we invite them to serve, we make sure that there's adults there that can mentor and coach them and walk alongside them along the way. The reason the student leadership pipeline is an essential element of a healthy parish is because it's addressing the fact that every parish is one generation away from no leadership. And I think many of our parishes are actually experiencing that gap right now. Because if you're looking at your ministry and you don't see, and you see the age of your catechists, your volunteers get older and older and no one's coming up, that means that something has to change and be addressed. And you can't just leave it up to the DRE or the youth ministry to take care of that. That's a parish-wide challenge that everyone has to embrace. You have to be asking who's next, because the responsibility of the church is for all the faithful. And last time I checked, faithful does not have an age limitation. And so that might mean getting creative with how do you have small kids serve, right? Maybe you have them serve with their families. How do you have teenage, like what roles can kids in second, third, fourth grade do? What are roles that teenagers can do? Are you willing to give a 17-year-old, 16-year-old responsibility over, a huge area? During the pandemic, when I got lucky and got the role of AV coordinator, because live stream, right? I remember we went to the congregation and we were like, we need volunteers. And the only person that stepped up was a high school student named Carlos. And he was in my small group, my high school small group. And fast forward a couple of years later, and Carlos, who's in college, is one of the 2 key leaders running our entire AV ministry. That means we're allowing him to oversee tens of thousands of dollars worth of tech equipment, which is scary when you think about it. But he's earned that we've given him the keys to do that, and he's doing that well. And now he's mentoring middle school and high school students to do that. So again, on that chart, 1 to 10, how well are you at investing in the next generation, not just programmatically, but in student leadership? Right? When it comes to sustainable ministry structure, what I'm talking about is how are you building something that is sustainable and adaptable no matter what happens. A great example of this happened with the pandemic. When the pandemic happened, because we had a small group model for our youth ministry, we were able to continue through the pandemic. And I'm not just talking about in person, but because of the sustainable model of small groups, when things shut down, our leaders knew that they could go check in on their kids by calling their parents saying, hey, how's Johnny? How's Susie? Things along those lines. Our groups could still meet. We moved to Zoom, and then when we could meet in person, we met outside, the fire pit, just different things like that. We got creative. But because we had a sustainable structure like small groups, we were able to move through that. The thing that I love about small groups, and I'm not saying this is a silver bullet, but with small groups, what they do with adults, kids, or teens, like a class, like an event, those can adapt, those can move, because it's all about relationship, right? It's all about knowing that there's that the people in your group you're journeying with, not just for a calendar year, but for longer than that. Let me break that down. So with our small group programs that we do for kids and teens, we kind of break it into when you become a small group leader, your commitments for the year, but our vision for you is right? Your commitments for a year, but our vision for you is three. What do I mean by that? Well, I know from working with middle school and high school students that first year, especially 6th grade and 9th grade, like the kids are just so hard to communicate to, right? Like if you get like one kind of constructive conversation, it feels like a victory, right? But one of the things that we've learned is that over the years, if a group stays together for 3 or even 4 years in high school, that not only does the relationship grow because you get to know the kids and the kids get to know you, but the conversation, it's a level of maturity that's profound and sometimes life-changing, not just for the kids, but for you as well. See, a lot of times when we look at classes, like we do in school, we mix it up. It's different kids, different teacher, different kids, different teacher. But if we're talking about really hard truths, profound truths, if you want to work with teens and adults and get into things like gender issues, pro-life issues, just different like heavy subjects, there has to be trust. So having a sustainable structure like small groups is so key, because then what you're doing is you're building relationships of trust. And then the teen is like, okay, not only do you see me and hear me, but you're starting to know me, I'm going to open up and I'm going to talk about this stuff. And I know that when you talk about this stuff, I'm going to listen, because you've been with me for the last year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years. And it's the same thing with adult groups, although kind of like a little bit on the different side, where I'm sure we can think of Bible studies or adult small groups that have been meeting for decades, right? And they're no wrong, like sometimes they start talking about Bible study stuff, and then they start talking about thematic topical stuff, and the next thing you know, you're like, are they gossiping? Are they talking about me? And that's because while small groups are a sustainable model too, like it's not just about the small group meeting, it's how does the small group evolve? How does it grow? Right? So with middle school, high school, and elementary school, so we have K through second, that's 3 years, third through fifth, that's 3 years, middle school, and then high school, right? High school being 4 years. And that's when we challenge leaders to shake it up after each 3 years, because we realize that not every leader is built for middle school students or preteens or high school students or elementary school students. So we want to give them a chance to, start over. We also know that even though you can spend 3, 5, 6, whatever years together, that sometimes the relationship needs to be shaken up a little bit. So that's where we do get that opportunity as we transition to the school to shake things up. With adult groups, sometimes we allow groups to expire, and they go from being really fruitful to really rotten. And so it's even something where you have to look at your adult small groups and say, okay, what does it look like to grow our small groups for adults? And after a certain time, how are we checking in with leaders? How are we checking in on the structure? Where maybe the group identifies another leader and they split into 2 groups and won't remove people. Or maybe they shake things up and move things around. And these are just different examples that we've used at the churches I've worked at. But when you look at your ministry, right, don't just think of the program. Just don't think of one model. But think about how can that model be sustainable? How can that model be adaptable? How can that model grow? Because as we're seeing, even the way we do life has changed. So the way that we do ministry needs to change. And so I know I have right now sustainable models, but I do want to leave some time for Q&A on that, because I know this is a lot of times when we come to these things, we're like, all right, Chris, get to the programmatic stuff. How do we do that, right? Well, just want to kind of leave some time for Q&A on that. So any questions about that? I know I just threw out some older models, but any questions to thoughts on sustainable? Sacraments in our parish, and it's encouraged by our diocese, is a separate program from faith formation. So basically, same thing with confirmation. So if you go to Catholic school or faith formation, that's considered your remote preparation. Your immediate preparation for the sacrament is totally the program. So our parish right now, we use a dynamic Catholic, Wesley, it's called, and that's done at home with parents. And our sacramental coordinator, Jane, same Jane from before, by the way. She's developing workshops and a pathway of not just parents working on it, but kids on how to do parents. But all parents recognize that just because your kid goes to Catholic school or is in our faith formation doesn't mean they're preparing for the sacrament. Because we also recognize that not all second graders are ready to receive the sacrament, and we don't want to impose that pressure. Same thing with confirmation. I've found, and again, this is just my experience, that every time we separate confirmation from youth ministry, both programs have failed. That the times where I've had youth ministry and confirmation, that's the same thing. The programs have shrunk, but as soon as we separate them, it creates a little bit, then it explodes. Because in our high school ministry and middle school ministry, you have kids that don't have to get and with confirmation, yeah, there's a little bit more encouragement, maybe from mom, dad, or grandparents, or whatever. But then it's also kind of like, this is something that's just specifically focused on the sacrament, and therefore we honor the sacrament, and we don't the sacrament doesn't get lost with every other part of formation, right? Because faith formation is different than sacramental. I think we forget that as a church. So that's how we. Yeah.
What does that look like? So you have information 9 to 10th graders, confirmation preparation, days, overlap. How does that?
Yeah. So for children's faith formation, that's Sundays, right? And for Sacramento Proud Reconciliation, First Communion, everyone comes to a kickoff workshop right on the second day. And then we give them a schedule of stuff they work on at home with their kids. And then they come to a mid-season workshop on reconciliation. And then we're working on building advisors who call in on parents and say like, hey, how's it going? What can I help you with? What's your kid understanding? What you did not understand? That's something that's building in. And then we get to the actual sacrament, so receiving reconciliation. And then we do that same thing with Eucharist, right? With confirmation, high school students come on Wednesday or Tuesday nights. Our school, by the way, is K through 8, and the way that we do it is if a kid comes to our confirmation program and is not a part of our youth ministry, we say, hey, listen, we would love for you to be involved in youth ministry because while you form community in confirmation, while you learn about your faith in confirmation, if you really want to know the bigger picture and really get the most out of it, come to our Tuesday and Wednesday meetings, right? And then vice versa, Tuesday, Wednesday, we meet kids who meet other kids who are in the confirmation program. We're like, hey, Chris, what's this confirmation thing? Those confirmation classes meet on Sunday, and we do about 12 sessions of those just in 9th grade. Of course, if you're older than 9th grade, come and be a part of it.
That's what I just asked. What age does Baltimore do confirmation? Because I know all over the country they're in various
All right.
levels and states, but that's.
David, you just poked the bear.
I know, I'm sorry.
When it comes to confirmation, the whole I'll boldly go out here. The whole
Sorry.
conversation on age
Yes, that's what I did.
is like rearranging chairs on the Titanic. All right.
Because there's downstate, like in New York, just between the 8 dioceses, there's
I've met second graders who
Yeah.
could be.
restored order.
I mean, look, St. Catherine of Siena, she was 7 when she had, like, were you gonna say to her, hey, sorry, you gotta wait till 10th grade? You know you're having these visions of Jesus and hell and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, like, just wait till you're old enough to stay in church, right? Like, you know, and then meanwhile you have St. Dustin, right, who's like old, and you're just like, hey, sorry, you shouldn't have spent all that time womanizing. That's the boat. Like, you know, I'm sorry. Like, I mean,
No, I know. Age limits, I know
Age
it's not
limits,
really a
right.
thing, but
you know,
it's choice, right?
It's a choice. It's a choice. Now, I'm not saying it's the Wild Wild West. I know some of you are like, oh my gosh, she's saying like no rules, but no, I think we have to do our best. But before you can fine tune your sacramental prep, and this includes RCIA. Anytime before you can fine tune how you do RCIA in any kind of sacramental prep, you have to understand what does it look like to have life. What does the life of the parish look like? What does it look like to be engaged in church full sacraments in a parish? Small groups is a pretty simple programmatic element that can do that. But if you don't have people, if you don't have opportunities for people to serve in ministry, and outreach, and Bible studies, and small groups, and things like that, your sacramental programs will always just feel like a program. There needs to be things that they can enter into and enter out from, because, I mean, like, correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who oversee RCIA, how many of those people leave on fire wanting to do more, and then we're like, oh, sorry, we don't have it anymore. You know, and they're like, well, can I serve in RCIA again? And they end up becoming RCIA, you know. So we as a parish have to think about, before we correct our sacramental programs, look at what is our ongoing catechesis and formation look like. Everything from homily to small groups to faith formation, service, everything like that. And again, small parish, big parish. Like, what does that look like? Because then you can honor the sacraments and prepare them properly. And again, I know, and some of the feedback I got from the online workshop is like, how do you do this in a small parish or big parish? Like, I believe that, like, in a larger parish, sometimes the challenges are the fact that you have to scale this and figure out how to do it for hundreds of people or things along those lines and everything like that. Don't be afraid to reduce it down and simplify it. And if you work in a small parish and everything, you know, take advantage of the fact that you can be relational and it don't have to be programmatic. And even if it feels like schoolhouse faith or Montessori faith formation, where it's like, you know, of all ages and everything like that, allow the spirit to work that, cultivate that, and things along those lines. Again, that's why I never, like, while I write curriculum from time to time for different age groups, and I'm really reluctant to say, hey, use this program or that program as your catechesis. I mean, there are different tools out there that you can use, like Surge and Alpha are great as a curriculum tool. You know, life team is great at creating community for your youth and everything like that. These are great for children's literacy. You know, you can use those programs, but don't put all your eggs in that basket. Is what I'm saying. Try to figure out culturally, systematically what you're doing. Last element I'll talk about is intentional content, right? I would love to say that the only thing you need to do for successful ministry is hand someone a catechism and a Bible. And say, go read this. And then they come back from the cave and they're like, oh my gosh, I've seen it all. Like, ready to set the world on fire. I mean, it'd be so easy to do that, but we don't live in that world. And I'll never forget when a couple of years into doing ministry, I was like, you know what? I'm not finding any good middle school curriculum out there. I'm going to write my own content. And so that summer, I was going to sit down and write a whole year's worth of content. And I was going to start with the book of John. And I remember diving into the Gospel of John. Just, oh my gosh, so much this imagery, all these things I could teach. And it was going to be a 4-week series. And finally, I put the finishing touches on the Gospel of John. And I looked at my calendar and realized that we finished starting next week. And all I had was 4 weeks of curriculum. So I went online, bought some content, and just said, good luck, you know. And creating your own content, as ideal as it sounds, right, to like meet the essence of culture of your congregation is difficult. And that's why we have to learn the art of not just curating, but not just creating, but also curating our own content. And it really comes with a few questions, and we've already dived into some of those questions. But the first thing is, who are we trying to reach, right? Who are we trying to reach? Now, it's kind of a multi-layered answer, right? There are the people in the pews who we're trying to awaken. There are people who never have crossed our church doors who we're trying to reach. But who are those people? What are the challenges that they're facing? In fact, the best question that you and your team or your coworkers can ever talk about or ask is this: what is the single biggest challenge people in your mission field are facing? What is the single biggest challenge people in your mission field are facing? Just out of curiosity, maybe from earlier, maybe think about that. What are the single biggest challenges that people in your mission field are facing? Like, what is keeping them up at night, creating anxiety, forcing them to binge watch, to eat, to overeat, to drink, to engage in sinful activity? What is forcing them down a path of destruction? What's the challenge that people?
Too many rules. High attention.
Tell me a little bit more about that.
So I'm the director of religious education. I'm youth minister. I'm multi-service. I'm sacramental coordinator for baptism, first reconciliation, first communion, confirmation. I cover parish secretary, which is not there. I have to sometimes fix music. I might have to plan a funeral. I might have to coordinate with people outside. I have to learn how to use the programs the diocese gives me that don't run on outdated systems. All of those things are different hats and roles, and each one deserves my full attention because I'm good at my job. I'm good at it. I know I am. But when I have to do everything, I'm terrible at my job because it doesn't receive the attention it deserves.
Right.
And then you feel like you're not good at your job.
So I'm going to throw this question out and leave you hanging with it for a little bit. Just think about it, don't stop it. Why do you think you have to do this? Just think about it. Why do you have to do this? You're supposed to. And thank you for sharing that, because we are going to address that. What's the single biggest challenge that people that you are serving are facing? You know, to the point where you know church is the answer, right? Like, we're like, if they only knew Jesus, they only knew that coming to the table on Sunday, sit at the Lord's Supper, like, help them with those issues. What are those issues that they're facing that you know I can solve? Yeah. Exactly.
So mothers, socializing with mothers. Talk to everybody who's working outside of the home. And have to work. Do they have to talk to them? They're not, they talk to their kids. And they're like sitting place. Because they just it's difficult to make that peace, you know, that you kind of overschedule sometimes faith formation. You know what I mean? Like, you know, as opposed to eliminating, you know, a scout meeting or eliminating, you know, instead of 4 days, is you know, only 1 day. You know what I mean? Those are the biggest time to stress, rush of life. Try to want to be the best. Set the limits of the world.
Yeah, yeah.
I would expand that goes and say the guilt that comes along with it. Because you always feel like you're being judged if you haven't done all of those pieces. If you didn't care for your grandmother, if you didn't make it to all of your kids' events, if you didn't manage to do perfectly at your job, if you didn't make it to church, it's one more piece of you feel guilty because again, you're so scattered, there's the anxiety, there's the lack of peace, and then I think with the guilt on top of it, it's just a big negative mess.
Yeah. They do.
I agree with all of that that's been said. I think, and I don't know if I'm going to express this clearly or not, but I think the challenge that we all face, or maybe some people more than others, is maybe because of all this busyness and anxiety and so forth and so forth. We don't take the time to reflect. And so I think sometimes people that come to us who talk about programs, they don't even know the questions. They're not asking those big questions out loud. They're just kind of sit on autopilot. Every once in a while, it might hit a wall. Maybe they'll ask a question. But it's like, we just we don't reflect when we act. So they don't ask the big questions of life. They just kind of get through each day. It's a big stereotype. I think there's an element.
I appreciate you saying that because, right, like what I'm hearing from y'all, anxiety, depression, guilt, all those different things. And so my wife and I, we have this lovely dynamic, right? Where you know how there's a stereotype where a woman just wants to tell her husband how she feels and not to fix her fix his problems, and vice versa. The guy just wants, tell me how to do it. Reverse that with my wife, right? And she, as I mentioned, she's an HR, right? And so there's times where I just have a rough day. We go for a walk. This happened, and that happened, and this happened, and she goes into HR mode. And I say, Kate, stop being HR. I just need you to be my wife. Like, you know, like I just want to be heard. And she's like, I know, I'm working on it. Or sometimes she'll affirm something that I said. She's like, how did I sound? Did I sound affirming? I didn't try to fix it. But if you want, I have 4 solutions for how you can manage that. I'm like, okay, I love you. But I mean, like, going back to the anxiety, guilt, and shame, you know, a couple of years ago, we have this night with students who our pastor and I just sat down and like, hey, we want to know what's on your heart. What's the single biggest challenge you're facing? And the question, the answer that emerged to this question, what's the single biggest challenge you're facing as a senior, which all had to do with mental. I feel depressed. I don't want to feel like no one likes me. I feel like no one cares about me. And so we took that information. We're just like, all right, let's look at what we're doing and how do we create a sense of belonging and give them the space to think and process. I don't know if you guys know this, but the church has this resource called prayer. Holy cow, you know, like there are things where I don't think we pray enough with people. If you want, it's not the silver bullet because there's more to it, but if you want to get as close as possible, prayer is the best curriculum to do that. If you want to know what works for kids as well as for adults, teens, prayer. So what we do is we try to create the most prayerful environments possible. So for our teens, that means no cell phones in small groups. You know, not even at for the retreat we had this past weekend. This was huge. Every year we say leave your cell phones at home, or we take the cell phones when they come in and everything like that. In years past, you see kids like jonesing, like, please sir, I'll do whatever, just give me my phone, you know, like and. But this year was the first year ever where not a single kid asked for their phone back. And we were talking to some of those teens, and they said, like, we just didn't realize like, how much those things, the conversation they had with them, they actually got. And so, one is creating that prayerful environment. Two, we tell our leaders, kids, teens, everything like that, don't rush through prayer. We put prayer in the agenda for all their meetings. Do not rush through prayer. Always leave time for prayer. The one thing you're going to eliminate, it's the sharing life catechesis part of it, right? Because if they're not in the space to receive God's wisdom and understanding, if they're not in the space to receive that knowledge and that truth, then they're not going to receive that. Prayer is the one thing that prepares our hearts for that, right? And so what we have to teach our kids is prayer. That'll prepare them better for the Eucharist. That'll prepare them better for small groups or classes. That'll prepare them better for. And so, you know, again, what's the single biggest challenge in our mission field? It sounds very similar to y'all: anxiety, depression, busyness, all those kind of things. And we recognize that, you know what, in our curriculum, we have to create more space for prayer. Not just teaching them how to do prayer. Like we do, but giving them that space for prayer. And unlike the world with these mindful apps, saying like, your mind's on Christ, right? Your mind's on God. Instead of focusing on nothing, focus on something that's more profound than anything else. Yeah.
Christie's the planner, and I'm like, oh. Yeah. Here's another idea, same thing, squirrel. You know, what am I talking to my wife? I should have gone to her book club and seen it.
Yeah.
It's asking. It's like, he's one of my characters. He's a very good.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And you're right. Like for a lot of our parishioners, it is awkward, right? Yeah, especially if they're not back. Like you ask a lot of people, "Are you practicing your faith?" Yeah, I go to church on Sunday. Okay, how else, right? And if they're not practicing silence with the Lord, right? Like again, the reading that we started the day out with Elijah, he didn't hear God in the fire and the earthquake and the winds, he heard him in silence. So why are people so anxious and depressed? Because they're not sitting in silence. I think they're in silence, but in isolation, it's different. So we need to help them sit in silence so they can hear the voice of the Lord and also learn how to communicate and talk to them as well. So different exercises we have our young people, and what we're doing is we teach them journaling, we teach them, of course, things like the rosary and Lectio Divina, a lot of contemplative prayer exercises, because we want them to slow things down so that they can listen to the Lord, listen to the Holy Spirit. So again, the more that you give them content that they that will help them in their reality, right? The more you ask them this question, think about this question, the more you're going to be able to provide content, curate content that fits their lives, and it's going to show relevancy. And then they're going to say, wow, this parish really does care about who I am because they're giving me exactly what I'm thirsting for. Then that's when you can have the conversations about those deeper, harder truths. That's where you can start educating them and helping them memorize catechetical truths that sometimes we start with first. Yeah.
I'm finding, especially with the religious challenges in that person, our community is imposing that the way their children are disconnected. When we talk about who talk to, the priest, their catechist, that doesn't even enter into their realm. Parents are disenfranchised with the church in general, diocese a whole lot, and if I didn't have the pastor that I worked with, I would struggle within my own program. So that's where I find I'm struggling. When I first started in 2000, it's 74 kids in confirmation. I have 36 being confirmed this year. Now, some of it has to do with birthdays, but there's also a list of kids that I pull every year that I haven't seen in 6 years. The Target, and she'll say hi, and she'll ask about it. But
desire to want them in church. They don't have a desire to like send their child to formation, so I think we can get them there. And any of the work that we try to do, you said you had one person show up to your trash pickup. I had one woman who was expert show up for me. And it's like, how can I do any of these other things?
So.
Yeah, Chris, so there.
Hold on, I want to bring my car.
It's a miracle.
All right,
That wasn't on the agenda.
so,
Lisa got that
now,
out.
Hank, how many of you feel that?
That was, yeah.
I think how you, that is fair. I'm there
Yeah.
some days and I'm just like, why? What am I doing with this time, right? Like, how can I feel like a failure? You know, this is baseball where you fail and get into the Hall of Fame, right? It's church, right? And so that's where I'm reminded of two stories in scripture, right? So let's go back to the trash can fire, right? The kid in the trash can. That kid, he was the only one, and I could feel bad about myself. After all this work and this program, this event, you know, one kid showed up. That one kid, if he had the best night of his life, it's a changed person. Have that same experience of 100 other kids there. But God ordained that moment, blessed that moment to say, right now, this kid is the most important thing for you, Chris, for your ministry to focus on. Don't worry, everything else will work. But that one kid right now becomes right? And that's, you know, again, sort of like the prodigal son, right? Sort of the prodigal son, where the younger son comes back and the father throws him this huge party. The older son is like, oh, well, what about me? And sometimes it's that one person. So one person. And so I tell my small group leaders, if only one kid shows up to your small group, it's 2 leaders and that one kid, you know, first make sure it's a safe environment, you know, but like secondly, we're like, you know what? Spoil that kid rotten. Make that kid so thankful. Because the other thing is sometimes that kid shows up to someone else here. But if they know that there's 2 adults there that care about him or her and are sharing the love of God and Christ, they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, they didn't seem necessarily upset with them. That's sometimes where I think we got to check in, because our disappointment of the numbers show other people. Because like, how much does that stink? Like, you show up to someone and everyone's like, "Oh, you're here, but no one else is." You know, it's just like, oh wow, okay, I guess I wasn't good enough, you know. But like, you know, it's and so that we have to be cognizant of that, whether it's parents or kids or something like that. We got to make the moment, and that's where we got to change, right? Like, how many times I know I've done it, wanted to do a youth event, and only a couple kids showed. I'm like, hey guys, instead of sitting in all this, let's just, if only 5 of you had showed up today, other than like, okay, let's just sit at a table and like have a conversation. There would be no need for a PowerPoint and stuff like that. The spaghetti challenge was a little weird, but you know, like, so that's one thing. Second thing, I'm reminded of the story of the shepherd with 100 sheep, right? One was missing. What did he do? They didn't say, oh, good luck, man, chops, you know. At least got 99. He went out after that one. The woman that lost the coin, she searched for it. And I'm not just talking to you all, I'm talking to myself. I don't think we do this enough, where if parents aren't connected, if teens are not connected, then what am I doing with my time to chase after them? Like, if people are not showing up, I mean, how much wishing and hoping, emailing, and social media plugging can I do before I get off my tush? Sorry, and sit with them in the whole. It's almost. It's not like people. The way that I see it is, it's not that people are ignoring us. It's almost like they're stuck on the side of the road. Like, who's gonna come by and help them? Like, they're the man in the Good Samaritan story, right on the side of the road, and people are passing them by. Where's the church to help me and heal me? oh, the church is at the church, just waiting for me to like somehow miraculously get out of my sin, get out of my hole and show up. And that's where, again, we have to be okay to put the programmatic stuff to the side. Even if it's just for one family, even if it's just for 2 people, like we have to know it's worth, because who knows what that one person will do. How many of you have heard of the pastor Francis Chan before? Francis Chan. He's this mega church pastor out in California. It's changed the lives of thousands upon thousands of people, right? And it's if you follow his story, long story short, he's having this weird conversion to the Catholic faith in a way. But I heard him speak years ago, and he talked about how the youth ministry he grew up at, he was the only kid, and every week there was his youth pastor would minister to him. No matter how much this youth pastor tried, no other kids would show up. He was just the only kid, and he got fired. And Francis is like, not to blow my own horn, but like the one kid he mentored ended up being a pastor of thousands of people. So it's really a failure. And that's where like we have to be careful about the numbers thing, because it is one of those things where like, yeah, and you might do 30 years of ministry and only end up serve like 5 kids. Listen. But who do those 5 kids become? It's about outcome. It's not about faithful goal setting. It's about outcome. And even when Satan wants us to believe that we are failing to steal, kill, and destroy our joy, no. That Protestant church, that athletic field, that school, that you name Taylor Swift, right? Taylor Swifties are drawing millions, thousands, hundreds of people. And those 2 people, they're nothing. But those 2 people, bright spot, thousands upon thousands. So that's why we can't forget the marshmallow why. Now, how do we do what we do? So people probably like, can I get a volunteer? All right, come on up, Rachel.
Give Rachel a rock. I'm going under the table.
All right. So the big question, right, is what you were sharing before is like, how do I wear 1,000 million hats? How do I get this done? Stephen Covey. How many of you have heard the name Stephen Covey? And read his books, maybe. All right, this big rock analogy is something I learned from him. If you've heard this before, but I think it's worth it. In our lives, there are 4 things that are urgent things, right? And what we have to remember is what's most important, right? God has called you into ministry. What are the most important things that you do in your life as well as your ministry, right? So we're going to talk more specifically about ministry here. Because it's really easy to say, like you've got me outdoors. I was going to say, I think of middle school, high school, elementary, AV, IT, CYO, Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, all that stuff. And, like, how do I, like, what's most important, right? Like, what do I focus on today? And so that's really important to do, really important to figure out. But really, there's only 3 to 5 things that we can accomplish on a daily basis. 3 to 5 things that are most important there. And if we do those things well, then we're doing the will of God, and we'll find not only that we're more productive, but we'll find that we're producing more fruit, right? So these rocks here, these big rocks, represent the most important thing. These smaller rocks here are like, things that are important, but maybe not the most important thing. Maybe it's like meetings, maybe it's your youth night, maybe it's coming to an event like this, or something like that. They're important. They're things that need to get done, but they're not always, they're not the most important thing. Then you have these slightly smaller rocks, and maybe that's checking email, maybe that's filling out paperwork, all those different things. And, they're important, but like, at the end of the day, they're really the most important thing we're doing. And then you've got social media, right? And that's like the same social media, binging on Netflix and Hulu and all that kind of fun stuff. Maybe it's gossiping, maybe it's hitting the coffee house maybe one too many times, now you're over caffeinated, right? So a lot of times we start with this, right? All right, so what I'd love for you to do is take all of these other things. Let's say we're doing our big rocks last. All right. So now I want you to try to fit all of the different, all these rocks, all those rocks, right? All the meetings, all the things that you're doing, try to fit it into that, right? All those rocks. Yeah. Just dump them in. Your goal is to fit them in. Trying to move around. Oh, maybe I'll do TikTok a little later. So. TikTok's already.
Instagram.
Feel like we're getting over. All right. So, all right, we still got plenty of room, right? Sure. Now you have these important things to do. What do you think are some of the most important things that you need to do in ministry that only you can do, no one else can do? You have to do them, or else.
Oh.
All right.
Kids.
Yeah. Okay.
Your own faith.
But you ran out of time.
Oh, I did. I ran out of room.
Yeah.
Okay, so, my faith doesn't matter. Kids. It's solid.
All right. So basically, too many times we start with the urgent, the less important things first, right? How many times do you wake up? And what's the first thing you do when you wake up? Check your email, check your social media, stuff of what that team did last night. Don't worry, you don't have to wake up here, right? So many times start with the less important, the things that don't matter. And we try to shove then right, it's like it's 5 minutes till quitting time, and we're like, oh my gosh, I didn't check in with teams. Is anyone going to show up? Or oh my gosh, that parent really needed to talk to me. Maybe I'll talk to them tonight at 10 p.m. or if they're still awake. And we shove all those things that are most important, last. So. Anytime you see a youth minister walk in, that's stuff. Oh, just wait. No. All right. So what we should be doing is looking at what's most important. And Rachel, you mentioned, right, curriculum, right? Say connecting with the teams, right? What else do you have?
Connecting with parents.
Connecting with parents, okay? Okay, what else?
My own formation.
Your own. Yeah. All right.
My family.
Okay, all right, great. And then we're like, okay, some of these other things in, like meetings, sure that there's important work, all that kind of stuff. And there. These things over here. Okay, now I have time for things like email, right? Got time for, checking, the paperwork, making sure that gets filed away. Got to make certificates for faith formation, right? All that kind of stuff right there. And then, oh yeah, now it's time for TikTok, right? What we find. Trying to make the decent amount of answer. I know. That was a flaw. That's my secret. That's how it all fits. What we see, I think you're getting the gist of this, is that all of it just about flawed materials are all of it fits in one day, right? And I mean, again, it's a simple principle, something that we forget about a lot, but if we start with big rocks, God will give us that time to really so your formation. And it's gonna be different for each of you. I think those 5 rocks you mentioned, Rachel, are excellent, but it might be different for you if you're in RCIA or youth ministry or children's ministry or music ministry or administrative work. But what are those most important things that you need to tackle today? So on your sheets, there's a list of 20 things, or a list of 20 numbers 1 through 20. Thank you. And what I would love for you to do is write out the top 20 responsibilities that you have, and then take some time to circle the top 3 or 5 things, what prioritize them, right? And on the next page is the priority list. But I want us to spend some time right now thinking about of all the responsibilities that you have, not just tangible, but all the responsibilities that you have in your ministry role. What are the top 20? And then from that, what are the top 3 or 5? And I'll give you time to think about this.
Is it though?
Yeah,
Is
exactly.
it great though, that we have to fill, that we have 20 things?
I stopped it.
I mean, I was just trying to be affirming. Don't trying to shame anyone for being a workaholic, but you know,
I said overachiever.
yeah, overachievers. But no,
You don't want to be an overachiever.
and also, for how many of you, was this a challenging exercise for you? Like, you know, pretty simple. Why was it pretty simple? How about prioritizing? Okay. What, just out of curiosity, if people are interested in sharing, what's your top 3 or 5 things? What's that? So I would challenge that, because it's very reactionary, right? Because if you're dictated by the calendar, you know, then you're constantly just reacting to what's coming up in the calendar. So let me clarify, right? So does the calendar, let me ask you this question, and not just you, but does the calendar control you, or do you control the calendar? I was going to do a poll then. All right.
Yeah, it does.
But does it have to?
We all set our own calendars for the year.
All right, who made the rule that faith formation has to start with the scholastic year? All right. Who made I just want, who made the rule that the church catechetical calendar has to follow the United States of America scholastic calendar?
I think it's just
I think it's
tradition.
gonna default because families.
All right, so when does the liturgical year start and end? Thanksgiving, I got November, December. Let me make it a little bit more clear. Not to brag, but I learned this in grad school. Christ the King weekend, it ends. Advent, it begins, all right? You can take that home and share it at your next cocktail party. But I mean, in all seriousness, right? We have a calendar, the liturgical calendar, but we follow the school calendar. My point of that is the fact that there's a lot of unspoken rules that we follow that we accidentally follow, and it might have been because that's the way we always done it. That's the way the diocese has always done it. But there's nothing in canon law or the catechism that says that's the way we're supposed to do it, right? So going back to the calendar, does the calendar run your life, or do you run the calendar? Like, what would you need to do? And this is another good question for you. What's one thing you can think of right now that you could do to take control of the calendar versus the calendar taking control of you? So let me give you a suggestion, or at least from my experience. When I started over in ministry, so I was at Church of the Nativity, my first parish for 12 years. When I started St. Joe's, almost 7 years ago. I knew I was walking into a project because there had been, outside of Scouts and CYO, there had been no youth ministry at the parish. Except for Sacramental Prep for Confirmation. That was it, right? There's no school youth ministry, there was no high school youth ministry, there was just confirmation classes that happened. And they happened on a Saturday night. They were all like, I don't know why high school students won't show up. I was like, if they don't want to come to church on a Saturday night, I don't want to be at church on a Saturday night, right? And I was like, all right, if I'm going to build this ministry program, I need to start small. And so I started actually in January at the parish, which was actually, I don't know why we decided to hire everyone July 1st, because it's like, hey, jump into this crazy race that's going to start in two months, right? And you don't know anyone about it. So what was great is I jumped into this ministry. Nothing existed. It was in the middle of the year, and so we started small. And my goal was just to find 6 high school students and 2 other leaders that we could sit and try small groups with during the Lent, right? That was it. We're going to beta test during Lent, small groups, and see how. I'm going to use that opportunity to get to know some of the teens, some of the parents, some of the leaders, and just figure out what the culture of this parish is all about. It was very successful. We found actually 8 teenagers who were part of it, 2 of the leaders who were part of it, lots of enthusiasm around it. And so what's the temptation? The temptation is then, all right, September, Labor Day, whatever, Catechetical Sunday, whatever we want to do, let's like kick this thing off and like go bananas and just recruit as many teens. But with my pastor's permission, I said, we're only going to meet 6 weeks in the fall. And we're going to meet in October and go all the way to Thanksgiving. And then we're going to break until Lent and do 6 weeks, actually 8 weeks, 2 weeks leading into Lent, and then it was 6 weeks leading up to Easter, right? And that's what we're going to do. I was like, I'll throw maybe one event around Christmas and one event post-Easter, but that's all we're going to do. And there was a lot of people who were like, why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we doing more? I was like, hey, first off, you weren't doing anything, so I got you. Right? Like, so I was not good. I set that aside. I said like, oh, we'll think about it. We'll look into it. I should be more honest with y'all. A lot of these bold things I say, I said inside or to myself, and then outside I said like, oh, I'm sorry. But no, like people did push back, and I said, I in all seriousness, I said like, I understand. Just trust me on this, right? And part of the reason was because our church was not in shape. It was not equipped to run a full year of youth ministry. And so over those first 3 years, we added on maybe a couple of weeks until we finally got to a year-long or close to a year-long ministry schedule. And of course, COVID hit. And start over again. But like what that enabled us to do was take control of the calendar. Because now what was nice is there was not this pressure to have to start by Labor Day or by Catechetical Sunday or whatever that line is here, right? There's more of like, we're going to start when we're ready, and we're going to do this well, in that regard. And we're not going to say that this is the calendar from now until Jesus comes again, We're going to look at the liturgical calendar, and we're going to say, what makes sense for us? Does it make sense for us to always meet? And we're going to look at the life of the parish, and we realized that from the week before Labor Day, which is when schools go back, so actually 2 weeks before Labor Day, to about 2 weeks after Labor Day are the worst times to try to start anything programmatically. Why? Because everything is starting back. School nights, sports, all that kind of stuff. So we're like, we're just not going to touch that because we don't want people mad at the church for adding onto the pile. So you know what we're going to do? We're just going to start, Catechetical Sunday into October, and we're going to see how each year flows and things like that. And same thing with our sacramental programs, right? As much, I was sharing with this table over here, we had a retreat last weekend, and we literally had a kid sign up at 11 p.m. the night before the retreat. It's the blessing and the curse of what we have. We have open enrollment confirmation class, right? We want them all to go on the retreat. right now we can only provide one retreat, but we don't want people to feel like, you know, that confirmation is this programmatic thing. You know, some parents are ready to go September 1st to sign their kids up for sacramental prep. Other parents need, you know, 2 months to realize that they have 2 minutes to sign up for sacramental prep. But we're trying to create a calendar and a schedule that doesn't drive us, that's not reactive to what the world's doing, but it allows us to be equipped and ready to receive it. So that's just one small example of you know, taking control of the calendar versus the calendar control of you. Another thing so I would encourage you, go to your parishes and sit down and say, like, what would it look like if we actually didn't start faith formation until Advent? Like, what would that mean? What would that time give you? How would you spend that time? Sorry, I'm actually asking you this. How would you spend it?
Not rhetorical.
It's not rhetorical. It's not for you to think about. Like, honestly, if I said, you know what, I just spoke with Pope Francis, he okayed this, and then the USCCB, they gave it a green light. You don't have to start faith formation until the first week of Advent. What would you do with that time from Labor Day to Thanksgiving? Okay. Now, one would say, well, why don't you do that during the summer? You know? Okay. So it's better for your church to train catechists in the fall than it is in the summer, right? So why don't we, right? Yeah.
Try to do more of that. So we used to try to get the kids to go apple picking and then big pies for our city missions or for them. Yeah, the calendar is kind of fun. We haven't been able to get apple picking. That was something that they had. Like maybe I would use the better weather to do more out of like church things.
So that's a great idea. Is apple picking one of your big rocks?
Yes, if I can get back into my schedule, I'm absolutely. Because it was something that we really enjoyed.
But at the end of the day, is that what's bringing kids to Christ?
The notion of.
And let me rephrase it. Do you have to coordinate that? Not does the apple picking need to get done, but can anyone else in your congregation have the skills and the ability to coordinate apple picking with parents?
Probably. Okay. Essentially, recruit my catechists and volunteers. You know, it's not uncommon for me to send out an email to parents saying, hey, we've got this XYZ event coming up, and I do not have any adult support for this event. And it's, oh, I was waiting to see someone else to sign up, or, okay, I can come for an hour. And it was like, I can come at this time, but I have to leave this time. So, yes, it does fall to me to do organizing.
Can I continue to just be a little bit of a pain? Will the pastor fire you if you don't do apple picking? So the reason why I'm being difficult with that, and I realize that we're having a fruitful conversation, we're kind of coming close on time, is like, so you have that list of 20 things, right? You think you circled your top 3 or 5 things. The way that you can help really identify what the 3 or 5 things is asking the question, can someone else in my parish, whether I know that person or not, do this task? Right? So the reason I was just kind of challenging you with apple picking, right, is like, it's clear that it's something that you would love to do and enjoy doing, and I don't want to rob or steal that joy from you, right? But at the end of the day, for your job is the most important thing that needs to get done, right? Can it help your ministry? Sure. Not having it, does it hurt your ministry? Something's maybe missing. But at the end of the day, it's absolutely one of the top 3 or 5 things that needs to be done. I challenge that, and that's hard. I'm not saying this is easy. You're not going to go home tonight and get this done and be like, oh my gosh, thank you, Chris. Like, my mystery solved, you know? Like, this is something that I work on weekly, monthly, annually, with the spiritual director, with my own ministry coach, sometimes with my therapist, you know, like, these are things that I look at on a regular basis and say, like, how am I managing my time? How am I honoring God with my time, right? Your leadership is a stewardship. Your position is not your position. It's a stewardship. One day you're going to pass that cup onto someone else, or it's going to get ripped out of your hands and handed to someone else. And you got to make sure that you use that time wisely. And again, it's not to accomplish the task at hand, but it's to accompany people in the journey. You have an infinite God. You have to stop thinking finite things. You have to think infinite. And so one of the things that you have to look at is, instead of your calendar controlling you, how do you control the calendar? Well, answeralizing, knowing what's most important. Now, I know, unfortunately, I really have enjoyed this. You guys have been great. Sometimes I do these presentations and you've got one table, right? Just I love your face. There's only been one of you.
But we're not safe.
Yeah. I'll tell David later. No, in all seriousness, you guys have been great. I've really enjoyed this time. And I don't want this to necessarily be the end. If you're going to NCYC, I'll be there. Feel free to swing by the Marathon Vision table. I'll be speaking as well. I mean, another thing, and I know some of you signed up for newsletter that we have. You know, every Monday, I try to send out a Monday motivation. It's just like a little piece of scripture or a video maybe I watched or something that's inspired me last week. And that's just subscribing to our free newsletter. Don't worry, if you're not good with QR codes, I have tangible cards. And that's a free newsletter. And every Thursday, we kind of update you on some of the stuff that's in the blog posts along those lines. So, you know, if you're just looking for free content and stuff to share with your leaders or for yourself, definitely sign up for the newsletter. The other thing too is, I realize while my voice is represented in the trenches, it can't be the only voice. So if you like to write, if you like to you know, reflect on what you're doing in ministry, and you want to share that, and never had a platform to do that, my platform is open. So if you've ever wanted to guest post on the blog or even in one of the newsletters and everything like that, shoot me an email. I'll make sure that gets shared, cards and everything like that. And I'd be more than willing to, you know, help you share your voice, because it's not just about what I'm learning, it's about what you're learning as well. I think that's how the church can do it. Well, we also have our premium newsletter, and that comes out at the end of every month. And basically, it's filled with a video, an article, and an exercise on a specific subject. This one that's coming out tomorrow is all about student leadership. Talk about that student leadership pipeline, how we can develop leaders. And the purpose of the videos is something that you can download and share with your volunteers. Or you can take the content of that and reteach it as your own. Just don't resell it. But it's a premium newsletter. There's a little bit of cost, but basically the articles, the videos, the exercises, download, use them, share them with all your volunteers, your friends. Even if one of you signs up and shares it with everyone in here, I mean, that's a little weird, but don't, you know, but whatever, it's the kingdom, right?
I share your vlogs, you know.
You do? No, I'm just kidding.
Hopefully I should. It's a good, hopefully I'm trying to get people to.
No. But feel free to do so. And then if you're looking for something more, if you're looking for coaching or cohort, you know, and maybe there's a group of you who want to be a part of it, MYMU is our online membership site where you have access to some of the courses that we have on volunteers, small groups, things along those lines. But also, you know, we do an assessment with you called the M Code, which talks about motivational drives. You have access to a ministry coach, cohorts that will tackle a variety of different subjects as well. We'll have a cohort starting up in closer to Advent and everything that's going to talk about, you know, again, your motivational drive, like what drives you, using that M Code assessment. And again, that's free to everyone who NYMU as well. So those are just some of the resources that are available for you all. And the diocese knows this too. Like, even if you don't want to sign up for these resources, but you need help, I'm only in New York. I got time, you know, we can set up a free coaching call. Anyone who goes to my website can set up at least a free coaching call, just to talk about stuff that we talk about here, or things that are going on in the industry. Again, some of the stuff that I charge for is just to make sure that I pay for the URL, Marathon Youth Ministry, because, you know, you get one of those blogspot.com/figures, but, yeah, just, again, want to be available for you guys. It's the last time we chat. But other than that, let me close this in prayer. And then I'll hang around until my right can by fixing up. Now I'm moving back to the hotel. We'll get you there.
I have room for the rock.
Well, yeah. But anyway, before I close the prayer, are there any intentions you want this group to lift up? Any special things in your hearts or minds? It's good to pray for.
Pray for peace.
Yeah, no. Very well. Lord, thank you so much for this day, this opportunity to take a step back and talk about ministry, teamwork, culture, everything in between. Lord. I know that right now there's a lot of noise out there in the world. There's a lot of need for you. There's always a need for you. Can't do life without you. I want to pray in particular for peace in this world, especially with things going on in Israel, Lord. Peace for families impacted by the shooting of Maine, Lord. Peace for all the chaos and craziness that's happening in the lives of loved ones, students, and children and adults that we care for, and that we comfort with. Lord, we pray for our families, that we have enough in our buckets pour into them, because Lord, we know that they pour so much into us, and that they see what we're doing not just as a job, Lord, but as something that you've called us to do something beyond that, and Lord, that we kind of use that privilege, but that we use it to only strengthen our families even further. Lord, we pray for your healing and your love, especially for those things that are lost, for those people that we've lost, the things that we mourn over. You remind us that in the pain, Lord, you are there sitting next to us. Pain, you are carrying us through. The hurt, the loneliness, that you are always present. God, we thank you. We glorify you and we honor you to our Father, who art in heaven. Hallelujah. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. All right, thank you all very much. Appreciate your time.